Good evening and welcome to CBC New Brunswick's English Language Leaders Debate for Election 2018. We're coming to you live from the Riverview Arts Centre in Riverview, New Brunswick. Thank you for joining us for this special broadcast. I'm Harry Forrestal, and we're here in Riverview with the leaders of the 5 political parties. They, of course, are vying for your vote in this campaign. Joining me tonight, Jennifer McKenzie of the NDP, David Kuhn of the Green Party, the People's Alliance Party leader, Chris Austin, Brian Gallant of the Liberal Party, and PC leader, Blaine Higgs. Now, tonight, we'll be hearing their plans for running this province for the next 4 years. Here's how tonight's debate is going to play out. Our 5 leaders have already drawn lots to see who will stand where and who will go first. We've got them lined up according to that draw. They'll be answering a mixture of questions tonight, 9 in all. We'll have 5 questions from the public and 4 questions from our CBC reporters and editors. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to respond to the question, after which all 5 will conduct a 5-minute open debate. Now, when I sound the bell or when I yell, the debate segment is over. We'll move on to the next question, and there will be subsequent debates. Important to point out, the parties have not seen the questions tonight, although we have warned them of the broad subject matter each question derives from. At the end of our final debate segment, each leader will have 1 minute to make a final statement. Now, something different this election debate. Following the conclusion of our debate here, CBC Radio host Terry Sege and reporter Julia Wright will co-host our post-debate analysis on Facebook Live. And Terry joins us now with Julia. Terry, what do you have planned for this post-debate show?
Terry, I'm here with my co-host Julia Wright. Also joining me is Karina LeBlanc, president of the Pont Despondé Center. Jamie Gillies, political scientist at St. Thomas University, is here, and so is Madeline Gorman-Assal. She's a student at UMB. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Let's get a quick idea of what you're going to be watching for tonight. Karina?
I think I'm looking for authenticity, whomever sounds the least like a typical politician.
Okay, Jamie?
I'm looking for how the leaders mix it up, and in particular how Premier Gallant and Blaine Higgs interact.
Okay, Madeline?
As a young voter, I'm kind of excited to see if they keep us in mind tonight.
Okay, it's going to be a good time.
And I am going to be watching what you folks in the audience have to say about the debate as we go. Be fielding your comments, trying to answer as many of your questions as we can. So be sure to send us your thoughts, and we will all be back with an analysis in 90 minutes. Harry?
All right, Julia, thank you for that. That post-debate analysis taking place at 8 o'clock until 8:30. Now, time is precious here, so let's get things underway right away. We have opening statements, 30 seconds for each leader, beginning with Jennifer McKenzie of the NDP.
Thank you, Harry. Good evening. This election, the NDP is presenting a real alternative to New Brunswickers. Like you, the NDP believes in affordable education, accessible childcare, exceptional support for seniors, and a province where people can have good jobs and earn enough to take care of themselves and their families. The greatest challenge facing our province is that the youth are leaving. The NDP has a plan for that. Too many people are struggling to get by, to find work that matches their skills. That's why the NDP is presenting a fresh vision.
I'm sorry, I do have to cut you off there. 30 seconds for these opening statements. Thank you. David Kuhn with the Green Party.
Thank you, Harry. Good evening. I'm David Kuhn, leader of the Green Party, and I've served you for the last 4 years in the Legislative Assembly as the leader of the third party and represented the people of Fredericton South as their MLA. I'm really looking forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you in this debate. I hope it gives you a sense of the kind of premier that I would be should you elect sufficient Greens to the legislature to form a government, and what kind of government a Green Party would provide to you. Thank you very much.
All right, David Kuhn, thank you. Chris Austin with the People's Alliance.
Thank you, Harry. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. And as I'm sure you're aware, New Brunswick is facing some very tough times. We have an over $14 billion debt, an annual deficit of 11 straight years by Liberal and PC governments, which is going to be paid on the backs of our children and grandchildren. There's no question we need a different approach to politics. We need a different approach to government. I look forward to the rest of this debate to tell you some of our ideas, which is common sense ideas, to bring New Brunswick back into where it should be in a prosperous province.
Thank you, Chris Austin. Brian Gallant with the Liberal Party of New Brunswick.
Thanks for joining us. A Liberal government will invest to create more opportunities in a fairer economy. A Conservative government would cut into education, healthcare, and infrastructure, like Blaine Higgs did when he was the Minister of Finance, which helped shrink the economy. Our investments have helped provide 4,000 more full-time jobs, free childcare and tuition for those that need it the most, 90 more doctors for our families, and the first balanced books in 10 years.
All right, Brian Glenn, thank you for that opening statement. And last, Blaine Higgs with the Progressive Conservative Party.
No matter where you live in New Brunswick, we are facing the same problems. Our economy is tanking, and as a result, our healthcare, education, and social services are suffering. Worse than that, our children are leaving the province in record numbers while we spend their future away. I'm here to tell you that there is a better way, and it starts right here, right now in this election. I have a plan to turn our province around, and I have the experience to get the job done. I'm doing things differently. I won't buy your vote, but I will earn it.
All right, Blaine Higgs, thank you for that. Some fiery words to open this evening's debate. Let's begin with David Kuhn. The first question is going to be about rural needs. This comes from Mary Ann Appleby in Fredericton. Mary Ann asks, with the long-standing decline in rural New Brunswick and the family farm, can you outline your party's plan to reinvest in and reinvigorate rural New Brunswick? I'm sorry, David, this goes to Jennifer McKenzie.
Thank you. Like Tommy Douglas did, the NDP would invest in small rural communities, farming, fishing, and forestry, and in reinvigorating rural and northern economies. They are very important to our province. We are investing in infrastructure, like building important access roads from Janeville to Bertrand. And we're investing in communities by keeping rural schools open with childcare in every school and providing community-based home care and health care. Our rural communities are an important way of life for many New Brunswickers.
Thank you, Jennifer McKenzie. David Kuhn.
Well, first of all, it's a question of attitude. I won't treat you in rural New Brunswick as liabilities the way the Higgs and Gallant governments have in the past. Whether you live in St. Stephen or Sackville or St. Quentin or Woodstock, I'm going to treat you just as if you were in St. John or Fredericton. You will have equal access to health care. Your roads will be taken care of. If bridges wash out, they'll be replaced. I can guarantee that we will ensure that the woodlot owners, farmers, and fishermen of rural communities.
David Kuhn, thank you for that opening statement. Chris Austin.
Thank you, Harry. I live in rural New Brunswick. I understand the struggles and the problems that rural people face. I believe that rural New Brunswick needs more access to high-speed internet, roads and infrastructure. I mean, just getting your roads plowed in a reasonable amount of time in the winter is certainly something that every taxpayer deserves, especially those in rural New Brunswick. We will work and fight for rural New Brunswick to make sure that government services are adequate to your needs.
Thank you very much, Chris Austin. Brian Gallant.
I grew up in Shediac Bridge, so I know firsthand the aspirations, goals, and struggles of people living in rural New Brunswick. That is why we will invest to drastically improve broadband coverage in rural New Brunswick. That's why we will keep rural hospitals open and invest in their infrastructure and equipment, and also provide incentives for doctors to practice there. We will also invest in our infrastructure, roads, bridges, schools, arenas, and community centers to help communities in rural New Brunswick thrive.
Thank you very much, Brian Gallant. And Blaine Higgs.
We need to stop bypassing our rural communities with highways and invest more in rural roads so that we can get tourists and get people moving through our communities. Despite what the Liberals want you to believe, I won't be cutting them. We need our hospitals and our schools. They are the heart of our rural communities. Whenever you cut a hospital or school from a community, they can't recover. And that's why looking at expenses in rural communities like the carbon tax at 12 cents a litre, that's going to impact rural communities more than anybody else. We need to protect them.
All right, thank you, Blaine Higgs. Let's bring it back to Jennifer McKenzie now for opening this 5-minute debate segment. It is free form. Jump in when you feel like it. Jennifer McKenzie.
Thank you. The NDP's plan is tailor-made for rural communities. We would keep rural schools open and put childcare and other services to make them a hub of a community. Our plan to healthcare is to put community-based centered healthcare clinics in our rural communities. We believe in building up the small farmers and providing rural access to internet and all those services that New Brunswickers need in our rural communities.
Don't wait for me to
Our plan really, Harry, is focused on communities. So we would create a Department of Community and Rural Development. So the lens that government look through is at the community level to strengthen those traditional woodlot operators and farmers to transform forestry, stop the spraying over rural New Brunswick, and end the monopoly over the wood market that the Irvings have. We need to unlock the vibrancy of rural New Brunswick so that rural communities can thrive and flourish. I know they can. I'm talking about a renaissance for rural New Brunswick, and I believe our plan contains all the elements that will help that happen.
I think one issue with rural New Brunswick, if I could add in, is the fact that rural New Brunswickers feel like they're losing their basic services. Something as simple as dialing 911 and having an ambulance show up in a reasonable amount of time. I don't think that's asking too much from the taxpayers. Our plan would make sure that gaps in ambulance coverage would be lowered so that ambulances and first responders would show up in a reasonable amount of time by reducing unnecessary language requirements on paramedics, which creates these gaps in the first place. When we look at high-speed internet, businesses in rural areas, they need high-speed internet, and that should be a basic, thing to do. Well, no, it's a reality. It's a reality.
It's irresponsible.
No, it's not.
Based
it's a reality.
on poor
It's on the ground.
You know, no,
listen,
it's not.
lots of people cannot get an ambulance in a reasonable amount of time.
How do we keep our people in our homes?
Reality.
That's true.
My mom is 97, and she's living in her own home, and I'm fortunate to be able to keep her there. So we have an opportunity to improve our home care service, where we're putting more effort in service and delivery into our homes so that we can have the right home care in the right place at the right time. We need to ensure that our seniors live with dignity as long as they possibly can in the home in which they grew up and lived their entire lives.
So
Mr. Higgs. And what about the nursing homes?
The Higgs government,
and the ratio of care in the nursing homes.
Home care. Mr. Gallant promised home care, and when I go to the door, seniors are telling me they can't get home care. It's not there. There's no substance behind this spin you guys are talking about. It's more of the same.
You know, I think it's easy to see the rhetoric continue from these parties, but I would look at the campaign. I would look exactly at the campaign promises during this election. The reason our health care, our opportunities are being restricted is because money is being blown out the door by promises, expensive promises to buy votes. I've said I will not do that in this campaign. We're going to build a better New Brunswick and going to deliver the service that our customers need. And our customers are the taxpayers of this province.
Let's talk about delivering services. This is what you said, Mr. Higgs, in 2012. New Brunswickers need to be open to changes to the process and locations where services are provided for health and senior care, education, and other social programs. Those were your words written in a speech when you were the Minister of Finance in 2012. Can you explain to rural New Brunswick and to New Brunswickers what you meant by that they have to be open to changes to have their services in different locations when it comes to health, senior care, education, and other programs?
You can explain when you said in 2014 that New Brunswickers are taxed out, and then $1 billion later of new taxes, you're continuing to promise $1.3 billion of new spending. Who's going to pay for that in this province? More of the citizens in our province.
What about our covered bridges? What about our ferries? What about the types of things that rural people depend upon for their daily lives and their way of life?
We have said right from the beginning that our ferries and our rural roads and our bridges can be protected. But you know what? The current government won't even listen to a solution that's presented right before them to protect our bridges. We've gone from 300 to 58. And this government has continued to erode those heritage items in our community.
Mr. Higgs, it was a previous Conservative government, I might add, that paid $6 million to a Quebec consulting firm to come into the Department of Transportation to tell them to cut the roads and the road service and get the plows off the road in the wintertime. It's exactly the Liberal and Conservative way to raise taxes and cut service and waste money. That's what they do, and it affects rural areas. That's the reality.
On the same old theme.
That's the reality.
The one issue, Liberal, Conservative.
The issue is you're wasting money. Liberal and Conservative. You're wasteful.
It's not rhetoric.
It's not rhetoric to ask you to clarify your words, Mr. Higgs, in a budget speech you delivered in 2012.
There's a tremendous opportunity in rural New Brunswick to grow agriculture so that we can feed ourselves in New Brunswick and be more self-reliant for food. And that will create tremendous opportunities. We've got a lot of unused farmland, a lot of young people who want to get into farming, and our government would help those young people get into farming.
Rather than inventing solutions, we need to ask the people in rural New Brunswick what works for them to ensure our communities are protected.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Mr. Higgs,
thank you for your participation in this segment of the debate. You've got the idea. You're doing well. Thank you for that. Let's move on to Indigenous issues in this province. Our next question comes from Russ Letica in Madawaska.
I would like to ask the political leaders, will they honor the treaties and unceded New Brunswick? Moving forward, how will you honor those treaties? will leave.
That's Russ Letica. I'll repeat that. Obviously, we have a problem with the sound. Russ Letica says, will the party leaders honor the treaties in unceded New Brunswick? And moving forward, how will you honor those treaties? That's from Russ Letica in Madawaska. David Kuhn, let's start this off with you.
Government after government after government since colonial times have failed to honor the peace and friendship treaties that our ancestors signed between the Crown and Indigenous peoples in this province, and that's been a disaster for First Nations in this province for generations. So our government would govern from the perspective of the treaties that we signed, to respect those peace and friendship treaties, and to invoke and implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That would guide our work.
Thank you for that. Chris Austin.
Yeah, look, there's no question that First Nations peoples deserve a right at the table, and they deserve a fair consultation with government. What we've seen, again, from Red and Blue is a denial of that consultation process, which further inflames the issue. The People's Alliance is committed that we will work with First Nations in every way possible, whether it's resource development or other areas. We're here to negotiate and to work and to move forward together.
Thank you, Chris Austin. Brian Gallant.
We will ensure that we always respect the duty to consult the government has towards First Nations people in our province. To do further, to help them further, we also have to make sure that we implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We have to follow through with the Murder and Missing Women's and Girls Inquiry for Aboriginal women and girls. We also have to ensure that we invest to create economic opportunities and stronger educational opportunities for our First Nation communities across the province.
Thank
and
you,
together
Mr.
we will.
Gallant. Blaine Higgs.
I don't think there's any question in the role that the First Nations can play in us building a better New Brunswick. I think the opportunity here is for us to find ways to work together to promote what's so important to us throughout the province. You know, we need to focus more on what we can do collectively, and the First Nations community needs to be a huge part of that. But let's spend time on growing New Brunswick for everyone. Let's spend time on working together on solutions that are going to bring the economy back in our province, going to bring people back into our province. And I'm asking for the First Nations people to be part of that, because we need their help.
Blaine Higgs, thank you very much for that. Let's begin our 5-minute debate on this, starting with David Kuhn.
On this issue.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer. My apologies. Jennifer McKenzie with the NDP.
Well, thank you for the question, Russ. I think it's a great one. I think that the Supreme Court has ruled quite clearly on this, that First Nations people have rights and that their rights have not been respected. And I think that previous governments to this one have gone along that track as well. And I think in particular, New Brunswick Aboriginal people have had a short end of the stick. We recognize that New Brunswick is located on the traditional territory of the Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy nations.
Jennifer McKenzie, I'm sorry, we'll have to take time there. David Kuhn, start us off on this 5-minute debate.
Well, it's time we have an adult conversation about land, because we know that the lands of New Brunswick were never ceded in the peace and friendship treaties. And government officials now acknowledge that whenever they have public statements, but there's been no meaningful effort to sit down and talk about how we co-manage the lands, like the Crown lands, which forestry occurs on in New Brunswick. And that's what we would do. We would begin that process to talk about land and resources.
You know, we said we were going to open up the Crown Lands and Forestry Act. And we're doing that because we want all shareholders to play a role in that, all stakeholders to play a role in that. And the First Nations are a big part of that. That hasn't been looked at since 1982. The opportunity here is to fix things going forward with the players that really can get it done. And I'm excited about engaging stakeholders to be part of the solution.
Mr. Higgs,
because looking at the long term is what we need to do. Looking at the future for New Brunswick together is what we need to do.
It's really
important.
important.
This Forestry Act will be fixed, and it'll be fixed for all people in this province.
It's really important that First Nations people have a say over how they are governed and how they get their services.
You see, Indigenous people are rights holders, Mr. Higgs, rights holders, not stakeholders, rights holders. And that is critical. We have a government-to-government relationship with First Nations in this province, and we need to start behaving that way. And to suggest that they are simply stakeholders, frankly, has got to be insulting.
I don't think
kind of
that any simple suggestion is being made,
for so long with
Mr.
First
Kuhn.
Nations.
I think I'm saying
that relationship.
We have a problem in our province. We have a crisis in our province. We need everybody to focus on having solutions for that. Because we can keep talking about our differences, or we can spend time talking about what we build together in New Brunswick. while at the same time recognizing the rights of every individual. And First Nations obviously play a very key part of that.
So as a government, we've been very pleased to work with many businesses to create economic opportunities for First Nations people here in New Brunswick. Plateau, Trevally were great examples of emerging industries and traditional industries working with First Nation communities to make sure they get the training opportunities and the opportunity to work as well. And of course, the Sisseton Mine, where we're very proud to have signed a revenue sharing agreement with the First Nation communities in the area, and that could be affected. And we're very pleased that we signed that so we can have the hundreds of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that the Sisseton Mine would bring to the province of New Brunswick become a reality.
And what we're hearing is that First Nations people are falling through the cracks when it comes to healthcare and education. They are not getting the same service, the same level of service as other people are. And they need to have more autonomy and more say over how these types of services are delivered within their communities. That's what the NDP would do. We would sit down with them and provide the supports that they need when they ask for it. It's really important that they have autonomy and independence and a real say in how they are governed. We see a nation-to-nation discussion with the First Nations people.
You know, the Green Party is the only party with 3 Indigenous candidates on its slate. I'm really proud to be running alongside Junior Denny, Sheila Croteau, and Robert Grisco from Pabineau First Nation, from Eel Ground First Nation, and from St. John. It is fantastic to have those folks there, and I'm looking forward to entering the Legislative Assembly with them as part of my caucus, and they will help us understand how to best build a real relationship with Indigenous peoples and First Nation communities in our province.
Ms. McKenzie, I agree that education is crucial, and that's why a re-elected Liberal government will continue to invest in the education enhancements that we've been doing over the last 4 years to help First Nation communities have the opportunities to have their children get the best education possible.
But that's not working, Mr. Gallant.
I certainly agree on
working.
that.
Right now, they are not getting the same level of service, the same level of health care, the same living conditions. They are struggling. And while we point fingers and decide who it is that is supposed to be delivering those kinds of services, they are hurting.
But that is
and we need to have those conversations with them and help them have the autonomy over their own situations.
There's plenty of money being spent, but little results being achieved. And the First Nations is no exception. You're right. They need to have better results from the money they're receiving, and they need to receive the amount of money that's necessary. I've worked with First Nations when I was in government before, and we had very meaningful discussions. And they were very entrepreneurial about what they saw as potential for their community and for the province as a whole.
And
I was excited about that because they wanted to move New Brunswick forward. They wanted to be part of that solution. And I'm excited to work with them again because together we will recognize the rights that they deserve, and we will recognize the important role that they can play in our future in New Brunswick, together with so many other people that want a province
Blaine
that moves
Higgs and the
forward.
Conservatives did not understand the duty to consult when it comes to hydraulic fracturing, and that's why one of the reasons why we put a moratorium.
All right, Mr. Glant, thank you all for your contribution to that debate. Let's move on to our next question. This one involves language. Our question is this. There have been growing tensions recently over bilingualism. What will you do to ease those tensions? Chris Austin, start us off on this one.
Well, the first thing we will do, we will stop the unnecessary language requirements that are placed upon New Brunswickers. We will base it on demographics and where numbers warrant. A man by the name of Louis J. Robichaud said, with respect to the civil service, the fact that a man or a woman is unilingual will not be a hindrance to the appointment and promotion in the civil service. That was in 1969 when he implemented official bilingualism. I totally agree with Mr. Robichaud, and I believe that we have to stop the unnecessary language requirements that divide this province.
The diversity that we get because we are a bilingual province is one of our strengths. Diversity is a strength of our countries, and it's a strength of our province. That's why we will do everything we can to help more New Brunswickers learn a second official language. We will make second language training free for New Brunswick adults, and we will also ensure that the French immersion that we restored to grade 1 stays there, giving opportunity to more people to learn French as a second language in this province.
Thank you, Blaine Higgs.
You know, it's unfortunate that this is still a debate after all this time. And because politicians have been playing in classroom, we still graduate less than 10% of our kids bilingual from the English system. I think that is disgraceful. And what is the reason? Because politicians keep changing curriculum. And Premier Gallant was no different. He changed the curriculum without the data to do so. So the cycle continues. I'm asking teachers to help us because we want our kids to graduate bilingual. It would not be an issue. And until that happens, we need to look at fairness and how it's applied. We have kids leaving the province because they don't meet the language challenge.
Jennifer McKenzie.
Well, it's not just changing the curriculum, it's the quality of instruction that matters. But we must recognize and value the bilingual nature of the duality that makes our province unique. French-Acadian culture and many other make our lives rich and vibrant. And we have to celebrate and combine our talents so that together we are richer than we are on our own. To open the language debate at this point is completely counterproductive. It is to do with the mismanagement and the privatization of our services. That's what we have in our system that needs to be fixed.
David Kuhn.
Brian Gallant's government and Mr. Higgs before that has divided this province between rural and urban, French and English. These past years have left many New Brunswickers angry at each other. Richard Hatfield and Louis Robichaud understood well that you can't play people off against one another. You can't play regions off against one another. It's destructive. So I would build everyone up, whether they live in Carleton County or the Acadian Peninsula, whether they live in Memramcook or Charlotte County. You can't play favorites, and I will not.
Chris Austin, start us off on this 5-minute debate.
I fully agree with Mr. Kuhn. The reality is the Liberal and Conservative governments have created policies over the last several decades which is dividing our people. When you talk to average New Brunswickers, people get along, whether they're French, English, or different dialects, different cultures, we get along together. It's only when government implements these ridiculous policies that causes the tensions among us. That's why we are committed to ending duality. With a $14.5 billion debt and annual deficits that continue to roll on, we would do well to afford one system, let alone two. These parties will not talk about it. They'll shy away from it from every opportunity. But we cannot take the politically correct, sanitized approach to these very important issues. We have to tackle them, we have to talk about them, and make sure it works for all New Brunswickers, respecting both French and English citizens in this province. It's a reality.
It's simplistic not to recognize. What I've recognized more so in the last 8 years than I knew in the 30 years prior to that. Because I've traveled all over the province. I've met with people in every community, and I find they want the same things. And I find they're very accepting. I'm learning to speak French, and they're very appreciative of that and work with me. And I see that everywhere. We do work together. But we have an education system that has failed our kids, and it's not because of teachers. I am convinced that when we make sense out of policy, and I've said I will talk about everything, because I can talk about the same thing whether I'm in the north or whether I'm in the south, because we have similar issues. We have an opportunity to expand on our bilingual capability. We have an opportunity for every child to have something that no other province has, but it has to be fair. And our kids have to graduate with the one single thing: they can talk to each other in this province. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that after
Higgs,
50 years.
That's exactly why restoring French immersion to grade 1 was important. You ask about data as to why we did this. There was a report done under your government's mandate where we had two former education ministers, one that was a conservative, one that was a liberal, that looked at this very issue, consulted hundreds of people, educators, teachers, parents, everybody that wanted to chime in did, and they recommended that the best thing for our children is to restore French immersion to grade 1. That's what we did, and that's what we will keep in place.
Let's be truthful. You didn't even wait for the grade 3 results to come out.
About
you just
where
did it
the French
anyway.
immersion entry point is. It is really important to change the way that you teach the children. It's important that you give them communication skills, the ability to listen, and the ability to communicate in both languages. And so we can improve the way that we deliver French language instruction in our English schools and vice versa. However, there is much more to this issue than grade 1 entry point for French immersion. There is investments that we can make in bridging the cultures and sharing and enjoying the value that each other brings to this province. We need to unite the province, not divide the province, along with this type of rhetoric that we have around the ambulances, that we have around grade 1 French immersion, that we have around all these other issues.
I don't know what province you live in, but here in New Brunswick, we deal with these things regularly.
That we respect each other, and that we learn about each other, and that we understand each other.
I'd like to make a further point.
I'd like to make a further point. It's problematic trying to use language as a wedge issue here when we're talking about mismanagement of our ambulance system. Terribly managed. Medavie
Why?
has
Why is it
10
mismanaged,
years
Mr. Kuhn?
to manage.
Why is it mismanaged?
The
Because
Medavie
it's been
system.
Because
mismanaged
of
by
unnecessary
private people
language
who have
requirements.
financial
There are
interest
no
in the Medavie
unnecessary
interest of New
language
Brunswick.
requirements. Let me
reality.
finish. There are no unnecessary language requirements when we're talking about ensuring that New Brunswickers can be served
You can
in either
still do
French
that.
or English
Dedicated
by a
translation line,
human
technology.
being. But here's the thing.
So
The
let's wait
government,
40
as
minutes for an
usual, has a
ambulance.
one-size-fits-all approach, which is setting a proficiency level for language, for bilingualism in ambulances, which is way too high for the paramedics. They don't need it. They're setting a proficiency level that you need for a civil servant who needs to operate in both languages. I've met a francophone paramedic recently who speaks beautiful English, and he can't occupy a bilingual seat. So it's not a question of not providing services in both languages
It's important.
on those ambulances.
Nobody's saying that.
We've
Nobody's
got
saying that.
when we say we're going to park ambulances and jeopardize health care, it's no question that better decisions need to be made.
I think it's important. I think it's important that facts be clear here. It is very important. It is very important to underline that since 2015, there have been 42 more paramedics added to the system. We have created 48 seats for training. We have, by fall 2019, over 90 new paramedics that will graduate from those programs.
We do not need
there
more
are,
paramedics.
Across the provinces, shortages when it comes to paramedics. There are unilingual Anglophone positions that can't be filled in this province as well, so we need more paramedics. And we will invest a higher recruit and retain more.
The bottom line is you can't play people off against people, and you can't fan the flames of language tensions. And Mr. Austin, that is what you are doing.
No, just because you guys want to shy away from the issue,
especially when it comes to health care, especially when it comes to ambulance service, it's so irresponsible.
Subject for now. Thank you very much. Our next subject is social justice. It comes from Rachel Richard. Here's her question.
Pay equity is important to New Brunswickers, especially to women. What is your position on pay equity legislation for the private sector?
What is your solution for the private sector? Brian Glant, start this one off.
Advancing women's equality is one of the best ways to create more opportunities and a fairer economy. That's why a re-elected Liberal government will pass legislation to impose private sector to have pay equity when it comes to large businesses. We will also appoint 50% of our appointments to agency boards and commissions to women, and we will also increase the funding for transition houses because they do important work to help victims of violence in our province.
Blaine Higgs.
I think any new legislation has to be thought of in condition with what else is going on in the province and in the country. You know, when we impose new rules and regulations on the private sector, and that's not happening around us in other provinces, what we do is drive investment out. And we've already seen that. We have 6,000 less private sector jobs than we did. So I very much support the concept, and I very much want to see home care, the pay equity in home care brought forward, because we need home care workers and we need the right pay and we need them to be able to have a career in home care, health care.
Thank you, Blaine Higgs. Jennifer McKenzie.
Well, Brian Gallant broke his promise already on pay equity. He broke his promise on nursing home care ratios. He's broken his promise to review property taxes. I am proud that as the only woman leader to be championing women's issues in this election. Childcare, home care, health care, and education all really matter to women. So does pay equity. We have a full slate of candidates across the province, including 50% women, First Nations, and trans candidates. They are working class heroes and have true values. We would start in the home care sector.
David Kuhn.
Well, Greens are committed to bringing in pay equity legislation to govern the private sector. There's no question. But there's no equity when women are living in poverty. For example, the current rules say if you're on income assistance and you receive child support, the government takes your child support money. Probably most of you don't know that. It's incredible that that's the case. So women are trying to live on money they can't, and it's insufficient to meet the needs of their families because our income assistance rates are terrible. They're punishing. And we're treating people as if they're criminals, and we're giving them a life sentence to poverty.
Thank you, David Kuhn. Chris Austin.
Well, I think at the end of the day, when we talk about the issue, it's about fairness. It's about equality. It's about equal pay for equal work. And the People's Alliance certainly supports that. I think any reasonable person would support that. I do agree that home support workers are largely underpaid, if we're talking specifically about that. They need a reasonable wage to be able to do their jobs and keep seniors in their homes longer, where they want to be. So in terms of pay equity, we certainly believe in pay equality.
Mr. Austin, thank you for that. Brian Gallant, let's begin this 5-minute debate.
Well, studies show that when it comes to minimum wage earners, predominantly they are women. So we will raise the minimum wage to $14 an hour by 2022. We will also pass legislation to impose pay equity on large businesses in the private sector. Unfortunately, Blaine Higgs and the Conservatives do not seem to understand that when you do this, not only are you creating more opportunities for everyone and a fairer economy that everyone benefits from, you're also helping businesses, studies show, be more productive and efficient. Therefore, we will invest to make sure that pay equity is implemented in this province so we can have more opportunities for women and more opportunities for all of us through the economic growth that it will create.
So we've seen Brian Gallant's policies change on the fly as the election has proceeded. Promising everything to everybody is the solution to what he hopes to be a re-election. But that doesn't matter to him where the economy goes in our province. It doesn't matter that people are moving out. We need a better social network, because I don't believe that everyone wants to be in the social system. I don't believe everyone wants to be at home. I believe they want an opportunity.
Pay equity isn't a social program. Pay equity isn't a social program.
How are we going to implement strong social services if we're cutting 2,000 positions in this sector?
When we look at pay equity or we look at the solutions, we need to have equal pay for equal work. There's no question about that. We need to be lined up with other provinces and jurisdictions. Otherwise, we put New Brunswick at a disadvantage for private sector investment. Let's not lose sight of who creates the jobs and pay the bills.
This is a discussion about women's issues.
Mr.
Why are
would
you
tax you
straying
more
off
Pay
topic?
equity is not a social
We need to talk
program.
about women's
Pay
issues
equity
in this
is about being
Spend more,
equitable
tax more.
when people work in the workplace.
There's no
It's really important that we talk about women's issues and then we don't go off on a tangent on other issues. It's important that we recognize that women are living in apartments with lots of children and are unable to make ends meet. It's important that we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour or more, and it's important that we give them childcare options. Can I please continue?
You're going to end up losing jobs.
It's important that we give them childcare options to go with that, so that they can go out and work and have their independence and are able to put a roof over their heads and put food on the table.
Well, Ms. McKenzie, we agree raising the minimum wage is important. That's why we'll do it right by 2022 to $14, and that's why we will also give free childcare for those that need it the most, and middle class will get support.
We need universal,
for the
accessible
cost of
childcare in places where people have it. What about rural poverty? But what about women living in rural areas? Where are they going to go?
Thanks to the federal government, we're able in this province to offer better childcare options for people because we have a national program for early childhood learning centers that's going to provide inexpensive or no-cost childcare for people. But my question to the Premier is how many parents are actually going to be able to benefit from that, because I don't see very many early child learning centers getting set up, and the requirements are quite stiff. You have to take babies in them if you're going to be eligible.
And
Thank you for the question. So first off, the money is from the federal government and the provincial government, and the policy that was developed here in this province was developed by us, the Liberal government. And let me also tell you, Mr. Kuhn, that in St. John and Edmundston, the two regions where we started to roll this out, we have had immense success. Over 80 to 90% in the two regions of daycare operators have joined the ELCs, Early Learning Centers, and we have over 500 parents, families that are receiving some type of subsidy, with over 300 in two regions, Ms. McKenzie. Over 300 children have their parents receiving free childcare in those two regions, and that will be rolled up by March 2019, province-wide.
And it's way too long, way too little, way too late.
Brian Gallant,
you look at
what
the
you say
statistics,
is
there
not what
isn't
you
any
mean,
market
and what you mean is not what you say. There's no substance under what you're talking about. What you announce,
you just said you said the program was a good one, and it's one that we're the ones that developed.
But you're not rolling it out.
It's not universal. It's not accessible. It's not affordable.
That child care. If you have a preschool center, you need to take babies to be able to be eligible to participate in that program, and many can't take babies.
Mr. Kuhn, over 80% to 90% in those two regions of the daycare operators have signed up for this program.
But you're only
Hundreds of people have received free child care and relief for the middle class.
Like
we
every
need
other
thousands
government
of
operation,
spots.
money is being spent, but the results aren't happening. We see it in home care. We see it in women living in poverty. We see it in the social assistance program. 36,000 people on social assistance. And when I asked what was the plan, there's no plan to get people out of the cycle of poverty or out of the cycle of social assistance.
What was your plan?
We need to have money put
Isn't this
into the
question
system.
about women?
We need to provide an opportunity for those people to go out into the workplace and not have their money clawed back, and work with single mothers so they have child care, that they can do that and get back into the system.
To answer the question, we will pass
Mr.
legislation to impose pay equity in the private sector.
you completed before the time was out. That's a remarkable turn of events for our debate. Thank you very much for that engaging discussion. We're going to move along to another subject now. This one, of course, affects all New Brunswickers, the environment. Our question to you tonight is this. The effects of climate change are increasingly evident in this province. Consider last spring's flooding as an example. What would you do to lessen the effects of climate change in the province? And more importantly, how would you fund that response? Blaine Higgs.
Well, interestingly enough, you know, one thinks, and it's being sold by Brian Gallant, that we need a carbon tax, another 12 cents a litre to reduce our emissions. That has not proven to be the case. We can't put more taxes on people and expect to get better results. We equally can't ignore the effects of climate change and the fact that they're real. So when you look at this and you say, how do we improve? Where do we have money we can invest in greener technology? We have it right in government through programs like RDC, through programs where Opportunities in New Brunswick can invest right now money they're spending for political issues.
Blaine Higgs,
they can spend on real issues.
Jennifer McKenzie.
The NDP is the only party with a clear, funded plan for reducing carbon emissions. We would place a $30 a ton on carbon emissions to generate almost $400 million. We would rebate 1/3 of that to low and middle income earners, 1/3 would be invested in green energy, and 1/3 would be invested in green infrastructure like transit, which is really important, electric vehicle infrastructure, and home energy retrofits, with Made in New Brunswick research and development.
Thank you very much, Jennifer McKenzie. David Kuhn.
We would tackle our three biggest sources, Harry. First of all, industrial emissions, particularly the biggest one being the urban oil refineries. So we would bring in environmental regulations under the Clean Air Act to cut carbon pollution, just like other emissions are controlled. We would use the Electricity Act to require NB Power to eventually get to 100% renewable generation. And we would mandate the Department of Transportation for the first time to ensure we have public transportation services across this province. That is key to reduce carbon emissions.
Thank you, David. Chris Austin.
I live in the Grand Lake region, and I can tell you when the devastating flood hit, it hit my hometown, my area that I grew up in. However, as devastating as that flood was, adding more tax to average New Brunswickers is not going to solve the issue of climate change in New Brunswick. We don't need more taxes. That's why we are committed to opposing the carbon tax and investing more tax dollars into energy-efficient programs for residential homes. Things like solar, geothermal, other things that can help the homeowner be less reliant on the system and more self-reliant.
Thank you very much, Chris Austin. Brian Glant.
We owe it to the next generation to step up and protect the environment by combating climate change. Our plan will force large corporations that are large emitters to pay their fair share. It will phase out coal-generated electricity by 2030. It will double the investments in energy efficiency programs for our hospitals, schools, and homes across the province. And it will ensure that consumers do not pay 1 cent more. We owe it to our children and the children of our children.
Thank you, Brian Gallant. Blaine Higgs, lead off this five
So
minute
interestingly,
debate.
Brian Gallant talks about what we owe to our children. I absolutely agree. But at the same time, he invests in an iron ore smelter and the research on whether that's feasible or not. Putting taxpayers' dollars in an iron ore smelter, one of the most polluting industries there could possibly be. So when do you go straight on both issues and say, we're going to improve carbon, we're going to reduce carbon tax, we're going to find a way for our emissions? And I agree, the large emitters need to have stronger regulations because we can no longer afford for that not to be the case. But new taxes aren't going to fix it. And Mr. Kuhn, you talk about what we can enforce for regulations and what we can do in relation to green energy. I agree totally. But you didn't talk about the fact you're in favor of more tax. I think we can do both here because there's money in the system to invest in green technology.
The other four parties are talking about fairy tales. They have plans, but there is no funding behind their plans.
I believe
Our plan would bring down energy costs very quickly because the fuel costs of green energy are zero. We are raising money to buy the green energy.
How much more people are going to have to pay?
That will make New Brunswick more competitive and the industry more competitive and the province a great place to live. If you build windmills, the price of wind is free. And so once you've built those windmills, you have electricity, you don't have the fuel costs, and your electricity costs come down. It's very clear. It doesn't matter whether you smirk or not. These are very clear ways of getting to a zero-carbon economy. They've worked really well in places like Sweden and Norway.
I'm glad you
and
read our platform.
It is time. I did not take it from your platform,
That's
David
excellent.
Kuhn.
Mr.
Absolutely
Higgs,
not.
A carbon tax is not a carbon plan, and you have no carbon plan. I just outlined the 3 key elements of our carbon plan, and there's much more to it. But in 30 seconds, what can you say except the 3 key elements? That's a plan. That's a plan to reduce emissions, and we will ensure that the federal carbon tax is rebated to New Brunswickers, and they will receive checks from that federal carbon tax as a refund, with a small portion of it going to fund things like public transportation, so that we actually have access to transportation services in this province that don't require driving if you don't own a car, can't own a car, or choose to leave it at home.
So our plan would put 1/3 of the money back into New Brunswickers' pockets, low and middle income earners.
Who's
It
going
would
to pay
put
for that?
1/3 into green energy, and it would put 1/3 into green infrastructure like transit, like electric
More
vehicles.
taxes.
No, it wouldn't be
Yes,
more
it would.
taxes.
Yeah,
it would
give me
be
a break.
less
It's more
in the long
taxes.
run. It would be
If you're
cheaper in
giving
the
free
long run
stuff out,
to
somebody
move
has
to
to
a
pay
green
for it.
economy. It costs only 1/4 of what it costs to fill your car when you have an electric vehicle.
So how much more is gas
That
tax
is a
gonna
good
go up?
idea.
It's not a bad idea.
It's a very good idea.
It's not a bad idea at all, but you can't trust governments to keep that funding in place.
Well, you can trust
That's the
governments
problem.
when you have governments that know that it's important and know that it's the type of thing we need to do to keep the youth
Mr.
in
Kuhn
this province.
is right. Mr.
Youth
Kuhn is
will
right.
want to move here. Our plan will create thousands of new jobs in green energy. That's the kinds of jobs that youth want to have. They will create jobs in manufacturing. It will create jobs in research and development. It will create jobs in all sorts of areas that New Brunswickers want. They don't want call center jobs. They want jobs that they can do and make a real difference to the world, to the community where they live.
But if you had government programs that was initiated towards that, towards refitting residential homes,
you're going to let the free market favor of a carbon tax, how are you going to fund it? You guys are just talking very, very, very
I have to correct Ms. McKenzie. There are about 18,000 people that work in the business services center, which you call call centers. It injects about $1 billion or more into our economy every single year. Now, let me say I agree with Mr. Kuhn that Blaine Higgs and the Conservatives have no plan, but I don't agree with Mr. Kuhn, and I don't agree with Blaine Higgs that we should be sitting here and letting the federal backstop be imposed on us. It's not right for the consumer. We will ensure that consumers not pay 1 cent more, and we will freeze power rates for 4 years for families and small businesses.
Freezing power rates is the most irresponsible thing you've heard said in a long time.
Mr. Glant had a plan, and he released it 2 years ago, a watered-down version of what the Select Committee on Climate Change proposed. And he is
Mr. Kuhn, you said we had a good plan
on that plan.
We'll slow down.
Mr. Kuhn, you said we had a good plan.
Mr. Higgs, give in here for a second.
They're trying to invent one on the fly. And so they'll try to encompass everything. Green technology is a process. We have to move in a direction that sees us reducing fossil fuels, but cleaner fuels as we move forward.
But you have to
otherwise,
fund it too,
what we
Mr.
subject
Higgs.
our citizens to is a massive increase in power rates, a 30%, 40% increase. Are they ready for that? I don't think so.
I will send the voluminous plan that we have to combat climate change to my colleagues here, and I will also send the quotes of Mr. Kuhn saying that we have a good plan.
But you've got
other than the price on carbon, which we don't agree with Mr. Kuhn, asking consumers to pay more. That's why consumers will not pay a cent more, and we will freeze power rates for 4 years.
You've had,
If the
Mr.
plan's
Glant,
not
through the
implemented,
election.
it's not worth the
One
paper
you'll
it's
change
written
if
on.
you get
Ladies
elected.
and gentlemen, I wish we had another half hour on this subject alone. You clearly have a lot of ideas to share and to challenge one another with. Let's move on to our next subject. This is one of social justice, and it's posed by our CBC reporter, investigative reporter, Carissa Donkin. Here she is.
Since 2008, at least 49 children have died under the watch of the Department of Social Development. Almost all of these children have died from unnatural causes. What would you do to improve child protection?
That's the question. What would you do to improve child protection? Jennifer McKenzie.
Well, clearly, child protection is one of the biggest priorities that we must have as a society. We have a lot of plans that would help improve the situation of children in this province, including raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and including putting childcare in every school, which would create 20,000 new positions in our schools for childcare, and it would be affordable, accessible, universal, and in the same location as the children go to school now. We would put public health nurses in our schools
I'm going to have to cut you off
identify
there.
problems
David
early.
Kuhn, what would you do to better protect children?
Well, I deal with these issues all the time in my constituency office, Harry, and one of the clear things after 4 years is the Department of Social Development has to be completely restructured to better handle child protection. Just before the writ dropped, I was approached to help with a case in my constituency where a child was at serious risk, and this Department of Social Development was going to close the file. And I fought hard to get that file opened again, and that's what happened, and they're now in the child protection system. But that's happening all too often. It's dangerous, it's unsafe.
David Kuhn, Chris Austin?
It is absolutely the worst of society when we see these types of incidents happen to children, our most vulnerable. But the reality is, these things can't be fixed when you have social workers that have hundreds of files they have to look after to be able to catch these things in due time. That's why we believe you have to properly fund Department of Social Development, especially in the areas of child protection, so that caseworkers and social workers can have a lessening of the strain on their work duties and create more positions to be able to help those issues.
As a society, we must be there to protect the most vulnerable, and especially when it's our children. This has been a problem for decades, and our government has been working with the Child and Youth Advocate and other stakeholders to make sure that we better the process. I agree with Ms. McKenzie. We also have to ensure we provide better childcare, making it more accessible and affordable. We will offer free childcare, and we will help the middle class with the cost of childcare. And finally, we will invest in transition houses as well to help women and children that are suffering from violence.
Thank you, Mr. Glent. Blaine Higgs?
You know, we've put a policy forward on mental health because we have thousands of children that are delayed years in order to get in to see a psychiatrist or psychologist. We have backlogs of children that need to be assessed and need to have a path forward. In terms of, you know, the system to react in a timely fashion, we don't have any overall structure that says, you know, this situation can't wait. We basically just kind of let it happen. It's unacceptable that we have these number of cases and we have this situation in today's day and age.
Thanks, Mr. Higgs. Let's start off this discussion about protecting children and having public information available about that process. Jennifer McKenzie?
When I talk to young moms with young children at the door, when I talk to the frontline workers who work in our schools, what they describe to me is they describe to me children who are bearing the strain of living in poverty. They see their parents and they worry about their parents, and they have high levels of anxiety, they have high levels of worry about their family situation. And that makes it almost impossible for them to be ready to learn. So what we need is we need strong social services. We need public health nurses, we need psychologists, we need mental health supports in our school, but we also need to extend the school day so that parents can work and bring in enough money to feed their children, to pay their bills, to put the roof over their heads, and to provide a good life so that they can participate in the community. These types of services are absolutely vital for young families, for young women, for people living in poverty. Raising the minimum wage is crucial. Daycare in every school is crucial. All these kinds of supports need to be there for women and for families.
Well, the red and blue teams have had years to get this right with child protection, and they failed. They failed time and time again. It starts with having an open system so people can see what's going on and what the recommendations are.
But that's too late.
And force them
we need to put
act on them.
preventative care
But we do have to prevent what's going on, and we need to ensure that we've got a Department of Social Development that actually is acting in the best interests of children, and that's not the case. And we need to drill down into that, restructure it so that they can handle it. And as far as poverty goes, that's why the Greens are the only party committed to establishing a basic income guarantee so everyone has enough money to live on, to get them out of poverty and help lift themselves out of poverty.
What the People's Alliance wants to see to end poverty is not creating this another overload of government subsidies and higher taxes. What we need to do is get a private sector-driven economy so that jobs are created, good-paying jobs that lifts everybody up out of poverty. That's the goal of the People's Alliance. You do it by lowering taxes and creating a business environment here that is open, rather than people coming to New Brunswick and going somewhere else to invest because it's not worth investing here because of the tax.
You're out of touch with reality.
It's completely ridiculous. You pay the highest taxes in Canada here in New Brunswick.
To put more money in the pockets of New Brunswickers and to help families that are struggling, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $14, freeze power rates for 4 years, invest $56 million in additional money in affordable housing, invest more in transition houses to help women and children that are suffering from violence, and we are also going to provide free tuition and free childcare for those that need the most support. Now, one thing that we will not do is we will not cut 2,000 civil servant jobs, because that will have a direct impact on the services that we're able to provide as a government, like Blaine Higgs has proposed. Cutting 2,000 jobs means less social workers, less nurses, less teachers, less people that are helping deliver the important services that we all depend on for our families to be able to thrive and grow here in this province.
You know what I would do is I would hire...
Brian Gallant would like to go on about changes we can make in the system, and he can just provide more tax dollars and throw it around without results. He can tell MB Power that they'll just freeze the rates and they can fire as many people as they want there to do that. But he's not talking about the future. Only future he's talking about is his future. Because in this situation of looking at where money is going to come from, we do need private sector money in order to pay these bills. But when you talk about the social assistance and the opportunities that people have, I don't believe for a moment that anyone wants to be on social assistance. But we make it very hard for them to get off social assistance. We claw back every dime if they want to go out and work a little extra. That's not right. That won't help. I believe people want to work and be productive in society in the way they only can, and we want to help them do that.
Mr.
And you know,
Higgs,
adding more taxes,
Mr. Higgs,
putting a carbon tax on,
of the people
taking on one hand, giving on the other, which we've seen Brian Gallant do, that doesn't solve it.
Listen to me again.
We need a long-term solution to help people get out of the
living on
poverty
social
cycle.
assistance
And we
cannot
haven't been
attach
able to do
to the
that
workforce.
because
You're
we
living in
haven't
la-la
changed
land.
the game. We can change the process, and we can help people and lift them out. Because they shouldn't have a choice.
How he has all the solutions. 4 years ago, he was in government. Now he's going to save the world.
We're here to talk
poor families a tax credit and then clawing back is so irresponsible.
We're here to talk about child protection.
How can you watch
and
a
so, as I
federal
said,
government
we need to
give young
restructure the Department of
families
Social
a tax
Development.
credit, and then you take back and put it in your own pockets
is
to
ensure
balance the
that
books to
Bernard
make you
Richard
look
is back in
good?
New Brunswick
It's just
now,
not acceptable.
is appointed Deputy Minister of the Department of Social Development. He was our first child and youth advocate. Let's put Bernard Richard in charge of reorganizing the Department of Social Development and get it right finally, because we failed. The previous governments, Tory and Liberals, have failed to implement all the recommendations.
What about providing the
Bernard
conditions for families so that these types of things don't happen? What about reducing the stress on low-income families? What about providing the types of services that they need right now?
Jennifer McKenzie, thank you for that. That's the end of our debate on that subject. This next one should be equally volatile, I'm sure. It deals with health care, which is a key concern for New Brunswickers all across this province. The question is this. The World Health Organization says suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. Yet families across the province say mental health resources for young people are underfunded and under-resourced. What would you do to address the shortage of mental health services for the province's young people? We're going to start this with David Kuhn.
Thank you, Harry. We would double the amount of money that's being spent on mental health care in New Brunswick to reach the level that the federal government suggests is essential to meet the need in New Brunswick. We've got to increase spending to address the crisis in depression and anxiety among youth that's happening in our province, and we have a system right now that is essentially rudimentary, and that's how we would approach this, and we would find the funding by cutting help for big profitable corporations by $100 million and moving it into health care.
David Kuhn. Chris Austin.
Well, this is another great example why we have called for an end to duality in the health system. If we were to merge Vitalite and Horizon into one bilingual health authority, we'd save over $40 million every single year. Now, that's $40 million we could use to hire nurses, psychologists, people to help ease the strain on the wait list, especially for young people with mental health issues. It's a disgrace in this province that young people have to wait as long as they're waiting for proper attention and diagnosis. That's why we have to change the system to make it work on the front line.
Let's check in with the Liberal leader, Brian Gallant.
Investing in mental health is not only crucial to support the quality of life of families and communities across the province, but studies show that it will actually increase our productivity, making our economy that much more productive. That's why we have signed a deal with the federal government to invest over $100 million more over the 10-year period of that deal in mental health services. This is going to go to the Integrated Service Delivery Program, helping our youth get the mental health support that they need. It's going to go to the FACT program, helping complex cases.
Thank you, Brian Gallant. Blaine Higgs?
That deal was signed many years ago, early in Brian Gallant's mandate, and no real change in the service being provided to students and kids and people that are needing our response. We see over thousands of kids. Look at our platform. We have an item in our platform dedicated to mental health. We want to hire more psychologists, more psychiatrists, and we've put the money in there to do that because it's providing that service for kids who need it. It isn't something we invented. It's something we realized talking to people that's needed. It's needed because our youth deserve better, and our platform lays it right in.
Blaine Higgs. Let's bring it back to David Kuhn of the Green Party.
I haven't had mine.
I'm sorry, Jennifer McKenzie.
Thank you.
My apology.
So the fact that 15 to 29-year-olds are committing suicide is a tragedy and very, very hard on families and communities. To create a rift between French and English over this issue is repugnant. The NDP is seriously concerned about young people. We are building a bright future for young people that will help them see the light at the end of the tunnel. We are investing in psychologists, in public health nurses, in
Jennifer McKenzie, thank you. I don't mean to cut you off or to,
That's all right.
wasn't ignoring you. Let's go to David Kuhn now of the Green Party for the start of the 5-minute debate.
There are a number of things, Harry, that are really important to do. First, we need to put more nurse practitioners in the system so they can work on mental health along with psychiatrists. And we need to put more community health centers on the ground so young people and others suffering and struggling with mental health can access care there. But particularly, we need to get rid of the cap on Medicare billing numbers, because right now in places like Fredericton, we can't hire psychiatrists because the quota is full. We need more psychiatrists. The chief of psychiatry wrote to the Minister of Health and all MLAs pointing this out, that she needed 6, 7 more psychiatrists in the Fredericton and Upper River Valley region and can't hire them, even though there were psychiatrists willing to relocate because of the cap on billing numbers. We've got to eliminate that archaic practice. We're the only province left with that, and it's preventing us from providing the mental health care we should be providing in this province.
It's a reality today, though, that it doesn't matter what we've talked about. We've discussed many things here this afternoon, but the reality is it boils down to money. You need to manage your money as a government to make sure that the essential frontline services are enhanced. And that's why our approach of ending duality increases the budget for government so that both French and English citizens can receive that frontline service. We can't keep wasting money and raising taxes. We're driving people out of this province in droves, and the decline of services continue to go on. Whether it's healthcare, education, infrastructure, it's all going downhill under red and blue governments. We have to shift course. We have to take a common sense, balanced approach
one of the most
to
important
eliminating
things
these
here
unnecessary dual
is that
services.
Brian Gallant negotiated a health care deal with the federal government that did not include a factor for aging. With the oldest province and the fastest aging province, our health care budget costs are going to go up like this. Our funding is going to go like this. And so we're going to face increasing stresses on our health care system that won't allow us to invest in mental health services. This language thing is total red herring. It's got much,
so if I may
much more bigger things that we need to look at.
McKenzie raised something that I would like to address. We signed a deal with the federal government that is going to have us invest over $100 million over a 10-year period in mental health. We have secured $75 million to be invested over 3 years in innovating on how we deliver senior care for the people of our province. A re-elected Liberal government will invest to create non-urgent care centers to reduce wait times in our ER. And I can also tell you that we're going to hire more doctors, more nurses, and other healthcare professionals. And I'm very disappointed to hear my colleagues today are not mentioning to you the Integrated Service Delivery Program that has won national awards, that was developed by civil servants in New Brunswick, winning national awards on its work to give mental health challenges, to give mental health support to young children that are having challenges in our school system. Every single one of my colleagues, I would have thought, would mention this ISD program that we should all be very proud of, that we invested to roll up across the province.
Let's talk about the results. The money that the Premier negotiated with the federal government, what has it achieved? We still have thousands of students that aren't able, thousands of young people that aren't able to get services in our platform. And it's nice to hear this debate tonight, because we say we're eliminating billing numbers. We say we're putting money to mental health, and you know, we can do it immediately. Because in the private sector, there's enough psychologists and psychiatrists to get the program working until we can hire the people within our system. We don't have to wait to make things happen. The money is there to do it. But you know why we can't afford to do it? And we haven't been able to in the past? Because the promises made during an election cycle are killing our province. The promises made to buy votes is the single biggest reason why we can't get results.
4 years ago,
he didn't do it. 4 years ago, he had the opportunity.
He's promised
he had the opportunity to eliminate building numbers. He didn't do it.
Spending since January of this year alone.
We're talking about teen suicide. That doesn't remind you.
To buy his next job.
One of the things that's going to aggravate the mental health problems in New Brunswick is the way this government is bringing in cannabis. They say they're trying to take a public health lens, and it's not the case. I tried to make amendment after amendment after amendment to ensure that the way the cannabis would be introduced in this province, that we would really focus on risk management, harm reduction strategy for youth who are at most risk, including their mental health from abuse of cannabis. This is essential, but the first store they open and reveal to the public, there's promotional advertising in there directed at young people to talk about how wonderful it is to use cannabis.
You have to be 19 to get into those stores.
Yes, and 19 to 25 is when you're at greatest risk.
By the federal government is with the goal behind it, with the goals behind it being getting cannabis out of the hands of our youth and getting the proceeds from selling cannabis out of the hands of criminals. And I can tell you that we are putting every regulation in place to protect our youth and to protect.
It would be good to remind ourselves that we're talking about teen suicide in this conversation.
It's hard to
and
believe.
we need to put in place things that will prevent teen suicides.
On the sale of weed.
It's unbelievable. It really is. I mean, it's a Crown Corporation to sell weed. Let that sink in for a minute.
Wrap that up. Another passionate discussion on an important topic. Thank you for your input on this. I'm sure this next subject will quiet things down considerably. It's the subject of education in the province. Here's Rachel Cave, one of our CBC reporters in St. John, with the question.
Teachers across the province have said inclusion without the proper supports undermines the classroom experience for everyone. How would you address inclusion and improve the classroom experience for all?
Rachel Cave there. This has been a hot button issue for a long time, inclusion. Chris Austin of the People's Alliance, what do you have to say?
Thank you, Harry. Inclusion is a big issue in New Brunswick. I talk to many parents that deal with this from the education system, and they certainly aren't happy. The reality is this extreme inclusion policy, this one-size-fits-all across the province, simply isn't working. What we have advocated for is what the education consultant out of Nova Scotia, Paul Bennett, advocated for, was the ability to work on individual needs with the end goal of reintegrating all children into a regular classroom. Now, I believe that education is a big issue, but we need more resources to make it happen.
Cut you off there, Brian Gallant.
One of the best ways to create more opportunities for all New Brunswickers and a fairer economy for New Brunswickers is by investing in education. That's why we have hired more teachers to address class composition challenges that they told us they were having. We will also invest more to increase our literacy skills, introduce coding in our schools, and reintroduce trades in every single high school in our province. And we will make tuition more accessible by making it free for those that need it the most and helping the middle class with the cost of it as well.
Thank you, Brian Gallant. Blaine Higgs.
Once again, the only solution that Brian Gallant brings to the table is throwing more money at the issue. I've said right from the beginning we need teachers to take control of classrooms. We need to let them tell us what works, and that includes the classroom composition. How many resources can you put in one classroom to have it a learning center? We need their voices heard. The past MBTA president said that the last thing teachers get a chance to do in the class today is teach. There's something wrong with that model, but I'm not inventing policy. I want teachers to tell us what do we need to do to make it work.
Thank you, Blaine Higgs. Jennifer McKenzie, not forgetting you this time.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, every child can learn, and we have to teach the whole child. And so inclusion is an important part of that, letting children be included in the society in which they live. However, it is important to have proper supports, and it is important to have a tiered intervention model so that when full inclusion isn't working for the child or for the classroom, that you can go into different levels of support for that child. It's really important for not just the child to be in the classroom, but for the other children to learn how to adapt to all types of learners.
I know a little boy who's entering grade 3 this year. He's 7 years old and he can't digest food properly. He has to be pureed. he's not toilet trained, and he can't draw a straight line. But thanks to Mr. Gallant privatizing the extramural program, he's lost his occupational therapist and he's lost his physiotherapist as a result of the privatization. So what on earth is the school going to do with this student as he enters grade 3, and what is his mother supposed to do, Mr. Gallant?
Chris Austin.
Well, I think it's important, again, that as we talk about education, that we have to get away from this centralized approach to education. We have to allow school districts and local schools to have more authority to make the important decisions that are necessary. It's this government overreaching of one-size-fits-all for all of these things that you lose that local autonomy and the ability to deliver first-class education to the students that need it the most. That's why, again, we believe that you have to work on alternate learning centers if need be, with the end goal of integrating all children back to the regular classroom.
Chris Austin is way off base. You don't understand how best practices can be shared across a system by having a strong central oversight to our education system.
It's working well, Mrs. McKenzie.
Well, it's not strong,
well.
And it's not working as it should be. But we need to put in place best practices, not just from around the province, but from around the world. You can team teach. Teachers can all become the best teacher by learning from each other, by putting in place really good practices. And that is done through shared learning at the system level as well. And so if you go to a local autonomy type of situation, what ends up happening is the kids that are difficult to teach, the kids that are hard to keep in your schools, they're sent home. And the parents don't know that that's good practice. Well, that's not good practice. Every child should be allowed to attend school. Every child should be given the opportunity to learn. That's what a public system is all about. Public school is about putting every kid in the school.
Withdrawn and services not provided. The little boy I talked about no longer has an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist to help him be included in school. And I want all children to be included in school. So we're not providing the necessary assistance to ensure all kids can be included in school.
We have increased the budget for education and early childhood by 15.9% since we've been the government. An increase of 15.9%. We saw Blaine Higgs cut literacy programs. We doubled investments in literacy. We're investing to put trays back in our schools. We're investing to give more support for families that are living with autism. We are investing to make sure that the integrated service delivery program is there for children that have mental health or addiction challenges. These investments are going to give us a return of a stronger economy and a fairer economy.
We hear endless tirades from Brian Gallant of how he's spending taxpayer dollars. No results of any kind that he can report to. In our platform, we talk about the situation of how do we provide the right funding, the right capability for parents with special needs children. And that goes beyond just the classroom. What breaks my heart when I see an aging parent moving their child around, looking after them, and on their mind, they're thinking, what's going to happen to my child when I'm no longer around? And the point is, there's money in the system to have an extended program, not only for special needs in any category, but help the parents to cope with the situation they have. And it goes beyond the classroom, because it goes beyond the ability to learn to their full potential. It goes beyond going into a case where you care for them long term. It's not about throwing money, as Brian Gallant has done for the last 4 years,
you have cut into education as the finance minister.
But just
you have a plan to cut more into education, and I will not call investments in education spending or throwaway money. Investments in education is the best thing we can do to give future prosperity to our province, a fairer economy, and opportunities for all. And I will make no apologies for being the premier that has invested the most in education in the history of our province.
You are the premier who took away the pediatric occupational therapist and
an increase of 15.9%.
You're throwing money at a
we have increased the budget of early
I think it's really important.
That child.
It's really important that we make sure all children live in poverty have access to
living with autism, and I'm going to put extramural health back in our regional health authorities and get those occupational therapists and physiotherapists back to the kids in schools so they can go to school and so their parents can know they're being taken care of.
It's really important that we also address the issue of every child being able to attend school. And so that is why we have eliminated the fees for colleges across the board. And we are reducing university tuition by 25%. And we're forgiving the interest on the loans for people as long as they stay in New Brunswick.
Will you
When
remove the
people
TAP program?
graduate from university, they have loans that are the size of houses. And then we put them into jobs where they're not even making $15 an hour. And so why
free
would
tuition
youth
still a go,
feel,
Marie?
I mean, if we want to go back to the talking about youth
Inclusion?
suicide.
You were talking about inclusion.
No, I'm talking about making sure that everybody
talking
can
about inclusion in the
participate.
classroom and in
Everybody
schools.
can participate
Well,
in
there should be
schools.
one
Everybody
single
can
goal
participate
here,
in our
and that's that
economy.
every
And
child
everybody
reaches
can
their full
participate
potential.
in
And that
the
we are
society
not
we
achieving
live
in any category. We need to see our kids coming out able to compete with anywhere in this country and anywhere in the world for that matter. Being 7th and 8th in education is not acceptable. Not having our kids graduate
Literacy
to their
rates
full
went
potential
down
is
every
not
single year
acceptable.
when you were the Minister of Finance
Mr.
because you were
Gallant,
cutting into
he can
education.
actually-
We invested and literacy rates in the Anglophone sector went up 1.9%, the first time
It's
in
gone
several
flat.
years as it went
Thank you,
down
ladies
under
and gentlemen.
Mr. Higgs when he
Thank
was
you
cutting
for
into
your
education.
discussion on that topic. That was certainly a lively one. A lot of what you have said tonight is colored by the availability of money, tax dollars, revenues, or whatever you want to call it. Fiscal sustainability is the subject of our next question. Scott Campbell wrote us with this question. In the context of our present fiscal challenges, election promises included, ladies and gentlemen, what is your plan for putting New Brunswick in a financially sustainable position? We begin with Brian Gallant on this one.
When Blaine Higgs was the Minister of Finance, he cut into education, healthcare, and infrastructure, and that shrank our economy. And it meant that he could not hit his targets to reduce the deficit. We have invested, we have grown the economy, hit every single one of our targets to the point that we had a budget surplus in 2017-18. We will balance the budget and start to pay down our debt, but not at the expense of education and healthcare.
Blaine Higgs.
So Mr. Gallant has spent with record numbers. And you know the reason we don't have enough money in the system to protect healthcare and education? Because we can't avoid the promising program during the election. Well, I have done that. I have made an election that says we'll balance in 2 years if Premier Gallant's numbers are correct, which I got to say, I'm dubious of that. But he continues to promise $1.4 billion of new spending in this election alone. Last time it was about the same or more, and we had all kinds of new taxes. Is that what's coming next? That's why our programs are at risk.
Mr. Higgs, thank you. Jennifer McKenzie.
Thank you. Well, the NDP's platform is fully costed with a balanced budget projected in 2019. The NDP governments have always been responsible fiscal managers since the days of Tommy Douglas. We do it by investing. So we are investing in green energy, green jobs, good jobs, and we're also injecting 18,000 new young parents into the workforce so that we have a workforce that can pick up those jobs. So our plan is good for the society, it's good for the economy, and it's good for the people of New Brunswick, and it's also fiscally responsible.
David Kuhn.
Well, I'm with the Auditor General. We need a plan. I have served on the Public Accounts Committee for the last 4 years, holding government accountable for how it's spending public money. The Auditor General has repeatedly recommended there needs to be a plan in place to manage and reduce the provincial debt, and neither Mr. Higgs' government or Mr. Gallant's government has heeded her recommendations. They've ignored her. I will not. I will lead an all-party effort, in fact, to put in place a plan to reduce our debt in this province.
All right. Chris Austin.
Every year, both red and blue governments give over $200 million of your dollars to big corporations, places like TD Bank, $9 million, an allocation of another $9 million to Sears Canada before they went bankrupt. It's this type of spending that is killing the province, quite frankly. And the only government that has ran higher deficits than the current government was the previous Conservative government. 11 straight years of deficits from both of these two parties, which have created a $14.5 billion debt. We would eliminate corporate welfare, eliminate duality, and we would streamline government
Chris
services.
Austin, thank you very much. We're going to start this debate, but there's a little bonus in it for you. We're going to have this debate at 6 minutes, and we'll begin with Brian Gallant.
We have been investing to create economic growth. The economy has grown every single year after it had shrank under the Conservative government while Blaine Higgs was cutting into education, healthcare, and infrastructure. We have more jobs today than we had when we became the government. Unemployment rate has gone down from 10.1% to 8.3%. The population hit its largest peak in the history of our province during our mandate. Wages have gone up every single year, and in 2016, we had the largest wage increase of all the provinces in Canada, and the deficit was reduced by more than half
to the
during that
young
time.
people that are boarding planes and going out west about how great the province is doing.
I'll give you you the link to Statistics Canada if you'd like.
It's ridiculous.
I'll give you the link to Statistics Canada.
The fact is, you've raised taxes to almost $1 billion in additional revenue. $1 billion in additional revenue. I don't want my tax dollars going to places like TD Bank. I want to see the elimination of the small business tax. I want to see the elimination of the double tax, so businesses that are right here at home that are struggling can make an honest go of it.
We reduced small business taxes by 44%, and we are going to freeze their power rates for 4 years to help them over the next 4 years compete for right here in New Brunswick.
Stop giving money to big corporations.
The taxes will go up on the carbon tax. We have seen this movie before.
Yes, 4 years ago.
Premier Gallant absolutely promised $1.8 billion last time around and $1 billion of new taxes. Now he's promising $1.4 billion. So what's next?
This
and you
is
know
a
what
ridiculous
is most
conversation.
hypocritical
It really
about all
is.
of this is while Brian Gallant rails on about my time as finance minister, I find it very ironic that Brian Gallant offered me a position as Minister of Finance or as Deputy Minister, and I have a sworn affidavit that says this right here. So you can laugh, Mr. Gallant, but it is what happened, and I chose not to do it because the government was so irresponsible in promising more and making more irresponsible promises that they couldn't get out of. And that's exactly what we've seen.
Blaine Higgs is not invited to be the finance minister of our
The
government.
NDP has a plan to grow the economy.
We need to invest to grow the economy in this province, and
There's no
that's
difference
exactly
between
what
these
we've
two
been
parties.
doing. The
There's no
economy
difference
has
between these
grown,
two parties.
and we have seen more jobs. Unemployment rate go down almost 2 percentage points.
Why don't you answer the question?
I just did. We have no interest in you being the finance minister of this government.
You want to swear an oath on that?
I will swear an oath on that. Absolutely. Of course I will.
This is ridiculous.
I have no interest in you being a finance minister of this province because we saw that you would cut into social programs.
Thank you.
The same parties are the same right here. Red and blue, it doesn't matter. Same parties.
New Brunswickers support investment in social services as long as they see that the system is fair and the taxes is fair. Right now, today, the taxes are not fair. You promised us a property tax review. The income tax system is not fair. We can do all kinds of things to make the tax system more fair. The NDP has a clear plan to grow the economy. We are investing in jobs. We are creating jobs. We are putting people into the workforce. And we are growing the economy by changing the way that we do business in this province. This is something that these two parties have not done, and clearly, business as usual is the way that things are going to continue. That is not responsible government. That is not what we want to see. We need governments that invest in the people that they're meant to serve, not in their friends that are sitting around the boardroom table.
Wait a second, David.
We're practically giving away our resources, so we would ensure that we are getting fair revenue for the timber that the big companies cut off of Crown land, and we would ensure that their tax system is fair. They're not paying their fair share right now. We would ensure that machinery and equipment is part of the property tax system so that they're paying taxes on par with other jurisdictions for heavy industry. They're practically getting a free ride in New Brunswick to the detriment of our deficit and debt. We need to fix that problem. We need to get the appropriate amount of revenue from industry in this province, and we're not getting it. And that's something that we would do.
Large corporations' taxes to do exactly that.
They don't pay taxes.
1% richest
They don't actually pay taxes.
So that they would pay more so we can invest more in education, so we can invest more in healthcare, and so we can grow the economy of this province, which we've been able to do every single year.
Third-party analysis of New Brunswick, last in healthcare, last in economic growth, second to last in education. We have the lowest median income in the province, in the country. And yet the Premier rates himself at 98%. I'd get 98% if I rated myself. Look in the mirror, Mr. Premier. We have had every single
government saw the economy shrink under his mandate. The only province from 2011 and 2014 that saw its economy shrink was under Blaine Higgs. We have grown the economy every single year. And in 2015, we grew it at the third fastest rate of all the provinces in Canada, and it's grown every single year since.
Ladies and gentlemen, if either of these parties were truly serious about finding out where the money's wasted, they would fund the Auditor General. The Auditor General, the friend of the taxpayer, is the most underfunded Auditor General in all of Canada. They will not fund the Auditor General because they're scared to death.
And then everybody has to follow her plan.
quicker than they can put them back in. You got to give the Auditor General more money, double her budget. Every dollar you give to the Auditor General, 10 will be returned to the taxpayer.
So we have
the same Auditor General that gave us the budget surplus.
Just a second.
We gave the Auditor General more powers by updating her act back in, it was updated last in 82. We did it in 2012. We gave her more money in 2010 and 12. And in our budget this year, we're giving the amount that she's looking for. I agree. The Auditor General has put all kinds of recommendations together.
You were the finance minister.
No
Why
one has
didn't you give her
listened.
more money?
You should talk to the Auditor General. I work very closely to work with her recommendations.
But you didn't get the results.
Increase
shrank
her
the economy.
ability
you
in order
didn't
to make
hit one
it happen.
of your deficit targets.
Why would
David
you want to
Kuhn.
hire me, Brian Glenn?
Gentlemen, hold on. David Kuhn.
We have nothing but opportunities to improve, and that's what a Green government would do, improve. We certainly wouldn't commit $21 million to Toronto-Dominion Bank.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that. I have to say this is the first debate I've been at where a sworn affidavit's been thrown on the floor. Interesting. Thank you for your comments on that. We're going to go to closing statements now. Each leader, will have a full minute to make a closing statement, your final argument to the voters in this debate. So let's begin with Blaine Higgs, please.
Our province is at a turning point. New Brunswick is on the verge of bankruptcy. It's the overspending during elections that is making it impossible to dig ourselves out of this financial mess we are in. It's why I refuse to buy votes with costly election promises. I had a successful career before politics. I'm not doing this because I need a job. I'm doing this because I love our province, New Brunswick, and I have the experience to get the job done. But I'm going to fight with dignity. While the Liberals are busy spreading lies about me, I will be hard at work addressing the issues that matters most. Let me be clear. I am not closing schools or hospitals, and no one will lose their job. I'm going to build our economy and fight for our children's future. The days of accepting last place in healthcare, in education, and economy are over. We can do this, but I need your support. A vote for any other party than the PC gives Brian Gallant a second term, and we can't afford another 4 years of Brian Gallant.
Mr. Higgs, Blaine Higgs there. Jennifer McKenzie, your closing statement, please.
In closing, I want to talk about our campaign with a clear vision for a progressive future for New Brunswickers, where nobody is left behind. Our platform and our commitment to you is a complete package. Raising minimum wage goes hand in hand with improving workplace standards and eliminating precarious work. Childcare is a key component for lifting families to a living wage and releases 18,000 new workers into the economy. Our carbon reduction fund not only transitions us to a green future where youth want to stay here, but it creates thousands of new jobs of the kind New Brunswickers are hungry for. We are creating jobs on the one hand and releasing workers into the workforce on the other. My commitment to you is to make the changes that will improve your life and those of the ones you love, like raising minimum wage, like pharmacare, like programs for everyone, like community-based care for seniors. I have a bold vision for the future that includes everyone. It's about giving people hope that the government will put them first.
Jennifer McKenzie for the NDP. Thank you for your statement. David Kuhn, closing statement from the Green Party.
We've had 170 years of the red and blue teams taking turns at running this province, but the parties of Louis Robichaud and Richard Hatfield have lost their way. We have everything we need in this province to live in a great place that we want to leave to our children and our children's children, except leadership. Together with the Green MLAs that you elect, I can provide that leadership to build hope, to bring us together to overcome the challenges we face, and leadership that builds for the future. While you won't see the word change on the ballot when you go into the polling station this time, that is what your Green candidate represents, change for the better. On September 24th, I'm asking you to vote for that change, the change we all need. Please vote for your local Green candidate so we can build a future together here at home. Thank you very much, and good night.
David Kuhn with the closing statement from the Green Party. We move on now to Chris Austin with some closing statements for the People's Alliance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't rocket science. Take a look around. Look at our province. High unemployment rate, families torn apart, working everywhere but New Brunswick, taxes through the roof, health care with over 300 seniors living in hospitals, wait times averaging 8 to 10 hours for some people that go to emergency rooms, paramedics that are gaps in paramedic coverage, people in rural areas waiting 35, 40 minutes for basic government services. The red and blue parties have decimated this province. We are at a pivotal moment where the People's Alliance can hold these parties to account. We can control government through a minority government, and we can make sure that lower taxes, less waste, ending duality, eliminating corporate handouts. It is absolutely mind-blowing that taxpayers are still giving millions of dollars to big corporations while small, struggling businesses here at home can barely make ends meet. We are going to take a whole different approach to politics.
Thank you, Chris
Vote
Osman,
People's Alliance.
For the People's Alliance, now with the Liberal Party of New Brunswick, Brian Gallant.
Thank you to the CBC, Harry, and my colleagues for making this important discussion possible. And thanks to you for joining us. This election is about the future of our province. For our collective future to be bright, we must do more to help families that are struggling in this province, much like my family struggled when I was young. That's why a re-elected Liberal government will invest to create a fairer economy and more opportunities for our young people to stay here and for our loved ones and friends that have left the province to come back here. We will raise the minimum wage to $14 to put more money in the pockets of our workers. We will freeze power rates for 4 years to help our families and small businesses, and we will create non-urgent care centers to reduce wait times to our healthcare system. On September 24th, I ask for your support. I ask that you vote Liberal so we can keep moving New Brunswick forward.
Brian Gallant for the Liberal Party. Thank you for your closing comment. Now to Blaine Higgs for the Progressive Conservative Party.
I think you went.
I did my turn.
So we've covered everyone. And we have time left over, but not much. I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for your brevity, for your patience, and for your vigor and energy in taking part in this debate. We'll see how things turn out on voting day. Thank you to all the leaders, and thank you to those of you who have been watching on television for joining us for this part of our show. Now, you might want to head over to CBC New Brunswick's Facebook page, because that's where some post-debate analysis with Terry Sege and Julia Wright will be taking place. If you're already watching on Facebook, stay with us. I'm Harry Forrestel. Good night.
Boy, that was, let's call it a spectacle. A lot of enthusiasm there in the debate studio floor. I'm Terry Sege. My co-host Julia Wright are here at the first campaign debate analysis of the evening. And I'm here with a panel of people who are watching the debate with us. Joining me here is Karina LeBlanc. Jamie Gillies is here as well, and so is Madeline Gorman-Assaul. So we all watched the debate. We were all talking back and forth through it, watching the points that the politicians were making. And so what we want to do now is ask our panelists for their thoughts on what they just saw. And Karina, I'll start with you, and I'll ask you a direct question. Did you think there was a winner tonight?
Well, I think Premier Gallant was the winner, maybe not necessarily because of the way he debated, but just because his counterparts couldn't put any challenging points that would expressly go against the platform that he's presenting in a meaningful way. And I think there was some good conversations, but nothing that would really throw the Liberal government off of their game.
Okay, and I just want to remind people that Julia Wright is keeping an eye on the CBC New Brunswick Facebook page. And what are you looking for?
Man, well, I am seeing a lot of people that were taken aback by the talking over the format of the debate, and also that gotcha moment at the end, in which Blaine Higgs said that he had this sworn affidavit, stating that the Gallant Liberals had actually offered him the job of finance minister. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen anything like that in a debate before. I mean, I would like to ask Jamie, what do you make of that?
I have a sworn affidavit that this was an entertaining debate. I was actually pleasantly surprised, despite the rancor in these 5 to 6 minute sections where everybody's talking over one another, that it was really entertaining. I don't think I've ever seen that, and I'm not sure what Blaine Higgs's tactic was there.
Because he didn't go into it,
what
right?
point he was trying to make in saying that the Liberals had offered him the job. I guess to say that he's a competent fiscal manager if he'd worked for the Liberals.
Or they thought he was saying the Liberals thought he was good enough at his job that they wanted him to do it for them.
But you have to follow that up with something and explain to voters that why that would be a reason to have them vote for him now as the PC leader. So I sort of understand the gotcha moment. It was sort of his maybe first direct hit on the premier, and then he followed it up with, I think, some of his best lines. But I still don't quite understand why set it up that way unless you're going to sort of follow it through.
Okay, same question I asked Karina. Was there a winner?
I think the format, like Karina said, benefited Premier Gallant. And the reason is that the three smaller party leaders were sort of trying to break out. They're all trying to punch, including Blaine Higgs. They all know they have to try to take down the government. They have to take down the leader. And I think they got in the way of each other so much, particularly interactions between, as Jennifer McKenzie would talk to Blaine Higgs or yell across to Blaine Higgs, and the way Chris Austin sort of cut in on almost everybody who was talking at each time. It basically allowed Brian Gallant to float above it, and because he is, I think, has very good debate skills, he appeared poised throughout. He never got rattled, and I don't think there ever was a direct hit on that, except for this sort of gotcha thing that I'm still trying to sort of understand what the overall point was.
I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the days, hours to come. Madeline, so this was your first campaign debate, watching your first campaign debate. What were your general impressions?
I'm not sure if my expectations were a little bit high going into it. It was definitely entertaining, I'll say that. But I think, there was a little bit less civility than I expected, I guess. I think they were less concerned with appearing knowledgeable and well-informed on topics as they were kind of speaking over each other and getting their word. And I mean, you could hear Blaine Higgs just going on for minutes at a time, and I could not get the point that he was saying. Like, I had no idea what to take from it. So
did it help you form opinions on what the issues were, or did it change how you perceived who you were going to vote for?
I would say I responded quite well to how Brian Gallant was actually delivering on numbers and staying on topic. So while his peers were kind of going off on tangents and trying to get the more exciting eyes onto them or some, I'm not sure if that was what they were trying to do, but I thought he did a good job of staying on topic and making everybody else look a little bit more off balance.
Okay, so we're on Facebook, so if you have a question, you can send it to Julia on the CBC New Brunswick Facebook page, or you can send it to me on Twitter if you like. My address is @SEGUINCBC. Julia, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing a question from, it's a comment from Mary Lawler O'Leary. She says, bilingualism is an asset to New Brunswick on the global market, but it needs an overhaul so that it makes sense and it stops dividing and costing. And this is something that we heard about tonight. I'm wondering, Jamie, if you could weigh in on that comment.
Well, I think that three of the five candidates kind of avoided the bilingual issue a little bit. The sort of the elephant in the room of dog whistling of one campaign focusing on ending duality, and only David Kuhn actually called out Chris Austin with respect to the language that he's using around language.
So points for David on that.
I think so, and I would also add a little bit that I think David Kuhn may be the other winner here. David Kuhn was himself. He's over the 4 years he's been an MLA and leader of the Green Party. He's, I think, acclimatized to these kinds of environments and discussions because he's on the political panels each week. And like Brian Gallant, he wasn't rattled in the same way. He was still David Kuhn. And what I found really interesting in the debate format to a certain extent is that while everybody else was talking over, when David Kuhn would eventually sort of get an opportunity there, the others let him speak. It was quite interesting, and I find that either it's the respectful tone that he has, but he was able to actually work that to his advantage to a certain extent in the debate format.
Okay, Julia?
Luke Tudor writes, the PC and Liberal leaders are both opposing the carbon tax on gasoline. Gallant promises to circumvent the tax, and Higgs promises to battle the tax in the courts. Which approach do you think is right for New Brunswick, or should the tax be added to the gas price? That's a complicated question. I'd like Jamie maybe to start, and we'll see.
Well, I think with respect to the carbon tax, Jennifer McKenzie and David Kuhn talked about the actual issue, about what it means to have, say, the federal government impose environmental regulations on the province. And they both have a carbon tax plan or an idea. The terminology around it's different per party, where the difference being that the Liberals have sort of a way to claim that they have a carbon tax by just simply taking taxes and moving and shifting them over, and the Tories don't seem to have anything except following in the footsteps of other governments like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. And then the People's Alliance is just, again, no taxes. That's that is almost Chris Austin's mantra.
Okay, Karina LeBlanc, you're president of the Pont Despondé Centre. Did you hear all the issues that discussed that were important to you?
I think there was a definite absence of the conversation around innovation and entrepreneurship. It's something that we as a province have been talking about as a core part of our strategy. And I didn't hear any conversation around how we're going to stimulate more of that kind of activity. And maybe it's because they all agree on it. It's not a contentious issue. But it might have helped a Blaine Higgs kind of argument, because he's focusing on this concept of the private sector-led economy, but he hasn't talked about what does that mean and what does that look like. And so I think it's really important that these candidates get around subject matter that people want to hear about related to the big sort of wide promises that they're making, is get down to the specifics. So I would have liked to have seen more of that.
And Chris Austin mentioned, wanting to see this private sector driven economy. Like, what does that mean to you when he says that? Yeah, actually, I hate the term private sector led economy. And the reason why I do is because it implies that the private sector is the one that's going to lead the solutions to the problems that we have in the province or regionally. And it's really about collaboration. You need everybody at the table. So you need government, you need private sector, you need nonprofit, and you need the academic community to work together in a collaborative manner. And some of the other, I think David Kuhn and Jennifer talked about these ideas, as well as the Liberal government, about collaborative decision making on issues and not this sort of single sector driven kind of strategy. And Maddie, there was this moment where they were talking about the way that like cannabis is being brought in and the way legalization is going to work. And it was in the context of this discussion around youth mental health. And, they said that the mental health of youth is at risk, basically. David Kuhn said, due to the way that legalization is being introduced. What did you think of that?
I had a hard time seeing where the jump came from, I guess. And I also thought there was a slightly problematic association with the as soon as we started talking about the violence against children, then mental health was brought up. And I think that's one of the key issues that's so troubling to youth in our province about mental health, is it's not always going to be in your face and you're going to be able to see everybody's problems all the time. A lot of the time people just need to understand that you can feel these ways and you don't have to fit this certain stereotype. And I think that's where a lot of the problems come from.
Okay, now let's just assess how each of the leaders did, and I'll start with Jennifer McKenzie. What were your impressions of how she performed tonight?
So as a woman, and I'm going to bring this whole issue up, sometimes it's very difficult to be heard, especially when you're the only one in a room full of men. Good point. I can appreciate that she had to do a lot of this sort of forceful yelling to get her point across, and I respected her passion in doing so. She had very well thought out policies, and her platform is comprehensive. And I hope that someday we'll get to the point where women don't have to yell to be heard. So I give her, pretty good marks for that.
Okay,
performance.
Jamie, assess how Jennifer McKenzie did here.
I actually do too. I think the format was a little unfair to Jennifer McKenzie, and it might have just been her placement on the side there, and then sort of having to be the last person heard after a sea of men, and that sort of was difficult to adapt to, but she did adapt. Where I think Jennifer McKenzie's problem is not so much what she said, but the fact of what she's fighting for. So the New Democratic Party is at both I think at the federal level and at the provincial level in a number of provinces is trying to find this space since the 2015 federal election, where essentially you had the federal NDP running to the right of the Liberals and the Liberals moving left, and Justin Trudeau won. And that's a space occupied by Brian Gallant at the moment. There's very little daylight between Justin Trudeau and Brian Gallant on the social issues that the NDP had consistently championed. So Jennifer McKenzie is trying to find that, I think, NDP vote back in New Brunswick, because she's a very much a different leader than Dominic Carty was, and I think she's making an appeal back to NDP voters. And I think one of the things she did well is that the issues that she focused on and the ones that she was most passionate about are also probably issues that are very passionate and close to the heart of voters in St. John Harbour. So she never actually, I believe, mentioned her riding, but remember, she's just trying to find one seat at the table likely in this election. That their polling numbers are...
That would be success?
Yeah, that would be a success for the NDP. So in some respects, some of that language that she was using and the way she was framing arguments is geared towards her home riding in the hopes that she is competitive there.
Okay, Madeline, your thoughts on Jennifer McKenzie's performance tonight, please.
Yeah, I think it was. I think she did well in a somewhat frustrating position. I have to be careful with the language I'm using, because as a woman, I like to see women in politics thrive. So it's difficult to separate my opinion with the bias. So, but I think she did a pretty good job, because I would also be frustrated if I was forgot 3 times. But yeah, I think
2 or 3, I think.
Yeah, it could have been 2. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think she did a good job of being critical.
Okay, let's just continue on that vein, if that's okay. I know we have more questions, but it wouldn't be fair to assess one and not the others. Okay, Chris Austin, what were your impressions of how Chris Austin did?
Yeah, I guess he was probably the one that surprised me the most, because I had the lowest expectations. And so I think his common sense approach came across in his argument. So he's right on brand. I don't agree with a lot of sort of the populist sort of things that are dribbling up through the particular voice, especially on issues of language. However, I think in this particular debate, none of that really came through. So I think he did a good job staying on brand and staying on track for his party.
Okay, Jamie?
I think that perhaps Chris Austin's goal was to debate in a way where his messaging goes to the voters that he needs to shift to the People's Alliance. And those
conservatives.
I think rural and conservative voters. The first question was probably his strongest, because he pivoted right to the heart of what that question was about, and making an appeal to rural voters. And one of the things that I think benefited him is that he was simply louder than Blaine Higgs in that sort of conservative, we can't tax our way out of it lane that I think both of them are trying to occupy. But I think his problem was, over the course of the debate a little bit, the way he carried himself in the debate started to hurt him. Initially, it was a surprise, almost punching above his weight to a certain extent. And then, because he was trying to sort of get in his message at each point when almost everyone was talking, that actually started to hurt him. And then Blaine Higgs, I think, got stronger at the end there, where he got back to his core messages without, say, Chris Austin in the way of that, in the way of him talking.
Okay, Madeline, your thoughts on how Chris Austin did?
In my eyes, he performed just about as equal to Blaine Higgs. I don't really respect that type of offense. I think if you're going to be attacking people all the time, you also have to have valid points to say, where I thought he was kind of just preaching the same points over and over again about lowering taxes, spending too much. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do differently? So.
Okay. Do you want to come in with a question?
We had some more questions
continue?
coming in. Lots of people weighing in on the comments on Facebook. One commenter, Tony Bull, is observing that he's male, he says, but he resented the female stereotypes being thrown around in the debate. We talked a bit about how Jennifer McKenzie maybe communicated differently as the only female candidate. He says women who are not living in apartments with scads of children, but are successful in a career, but are not being compensated at the same rate as a male counterpart. And they ask if the panel can comment on that. So did we see those stereotypes that he's talking about being trotted out in the debate?
Well, probably the worst comment from my ears was when Higgs talked about pay equity as a social justice issue. Like, it couldn't be further from the truth. I totally agree, and I think that rhetoric sometimes gets caught up in our language, and it creates these sort of false sense of, oh, these poor women that we have to take care of and make sure that we lift them up, when in reality, as I think we heard a little bit from the Liberal leader, was this idea that there is benefits economically to the province once we get women at the table and we pay them fairly and equitably. So I thought that was an interesting kind of dynamic that came out in the debate.
Did you have thoughts, Jamie?
I think on in that question section on pay equity, I felt like the whole debate and discussion was almost botched from the start. That somebody went off on a tangent, and then they almost each of them did. Jennifer McKenzie tried to bring it back to the actual issue of pay equity and women's equality, and it was really sort of a general discussion about the economy. So I did pick up on that language that I think all the male leaders were using in characterizing women. It's not just that it comes across as condescending or slightly misogynist without realizing it's misogynist, but that they're not speaking to women about women's issues. They're speaking about women, about larger issues.
Good point.
And that I think was a problem for all of the candidates on stage, with the exception of Jennifer McKenzie.
Madeline, do you want to weigh in on that?
I pretty much agree with what they had to say about that. But yeah, I agree. I think it is important to talk about also those women in positions of power who still aren't being paid the same. But at the same time, it is obviously still an issue. Women in poverty having the access to all the resources that they might need. So.
Okay, here's a question on Twitter from Greg Wright. He writes, does your panel care about the debt? If so, which party had addressed the issue best?
Yeah, that's a good question, because they didn't actually talk about it much at all.
No, that's surprising. I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, I think the debt is weighing heavily on the minds of New Brunswickers, me included. I think, I've seen... I think a lot about the debt and the deficit gets to be a confusing part of the conversation because people don't understand the difference. So we talk about reducing the deficit, and then we get all excited we've got a surplus. But in reality, the debt is the accumulation of all of the deficits over the years. And so that's where it gets confusing. And so I think that we need to have a conversation about, getting our budgets balanced. And then we need a bigger conversation about how are we going to address the scale of the debt, given the ability to govern a province with the population of our size. That's I think where the key critical point is, and we never talk about that because we're constantly talking about balancing budgets, which is deficit related. So yes, I think there's another conversation that needs to be had that wasn't talked about tonight and that we actually haven't talked about much at all.
No, Jamie, were you surprised that the debt wasn't a part of that debate?
I'm not surprised in the sense that issues like long-term fiscal projections and debt to GDP ratio is very difficult to, I think, talk to voters about.
So it's sexy.
Easier to, or it's easier to pivot away to things like surpluses and deficits because that a huge issue is really difficult to compartmentalize and discuss in, say, 1 minute. Every party, though, in each of their platforms doesn't really have a plan for dealing with the second highest debt to GDP ratio in the country. I believe only Newfoundland has a higher one. We're getting to the point where bond rating agencies, especially say if there's a change of government, 3 one-term governments in a row, are going to make this an issue, if not election night, then the morning after. And so while Chris Austin and Blaine Higgs talk about debt and talk about taxes and stop taxing our way out of it, nobody was prepared to sort of come up with a long-term, fiscally planned out, fiscally responsible solution for the problem of this long-term accumulated debt.
Madeline, the question was, does your panel care about the debt?
You're inheriting it.
Whoops. There's a buzzkill.
I guess I should care about the debt.
But do you really, though? Is that something that you think about on a daily basis?
See, I don't really have a large annual income of me contributing my tax dollars towards the government. So it's hard for me to contribute to this conversation that much. Obviously, as someone who's going to be in that position someday, hopefully back in New Brunswick, it's important that the politicians at least have a plan for it. But again, I can't really speak to it that well.
Here's another question that's coming in from Brent McPherson. It actually kind of echoes the story that our colleague at CBC, Robert Jones, did last week. He says Blaine Higgs attacked Premier Gallant on campaign spending, but he has not put a cost on some of his promises, and it's not good enough to say that he does not know the numbers. Can we weigh in on that?
I think that's just representative of a lot of this exercise in campaigning, and I think citizens in New Brunswick are tired of it. I think people are looking for something different, the governing differently, not making empty promises, not behaving like stereotypical politicians, and I think that's just a representation of it. I think we need a government who wants to try new things, who wants to engage the citizenry in a different way. I want more collaboration across the floor. These party politics are incredibly divisive. So one plan is good and therefore the other one's bad. I think that's what ends up happening, right? So I think that's what people are starting to see is this typical empty promise kind of rhetoric in the conversations, and they want something different. I don't know what that looks like, but
that's hardly going to help our voter turnout issue, which is another issue that people are raising in the comments. It's like, if the turnout increases for this election, we could really make serious change, right? And when you see kind of empty promises, I mean, that doesn't help people with their engagement in this process. Do you want to talk about voter turnout, Jamie?
Here's an example where I think that maybe the 3 party leaders, the non-Liberal and PC leaders, missed an opportunity to talk about voter engagement and things like changing democratic institutions. This is a huge platform, are part of the platform for the Greens and the NDP, especially things like proportional representation that might increase voter turnout, that might re-engage parts of the New Brunswick population. And I don't know if it was simply that the question format never addressed that issue and that they never got an opportunity to raise it, but I think it is one where if we look at polling data, just the couple of polls that have been conducted during the campaign, upwards of 25% of voters in New Brunswick are considering or strongly considering a third party. This is the highest levels. We have the Greens into double digits. You have the People's Alliance and the NDP polling in the sort of the high single digits. Collectively, we're almost at about 25% here.
That would be highest since the core party, I suppose.
Probably in terms of since the core party sort of split in 1991, but. It surprised me that these smaller parties didn't find their opportunity to pivot to that discussion a little bit.
There's another point being made on Twitter about some of the issues that weren't discussed, and I don't know how much value there is in talking about the things that weren't discussed, except to say that there are some people out there who wanted to hear discussion about things like the Sisson mine. Tyler Moore writes, a huge issue that impacts most of the province financially and environmentally. Where was that in the debate? And other people are wondering, where was the questions or where was the debate about economic development regarding pipelines and energy resource development? So you can't get everybody's interests dealt with, but some people are feeling that there were some important issues left out. Can we go back for a moment just to get an assessment of the leaders, because we talked about Jennifer McKenzie and Chris Austin. David Kuhn.
Yeah, I would put him at the strong, silent type,
There's a T-shirt coming. I can see it.
Yes. He came across very even-keeled. He was able to get his points across without yelling, which was refreshing. I think David's biggest problem is he can't differentiate his platform from, the existing sitting Liberal government in a significant enough way to get voters really excited and get behind it. And I didn't see any of that tonight either. And there is something to be said about passion. And again, I went back to those comments about Jennifer that can resonate with voters as well, as like get excited, get angry, show some emotion. So there is an element of that as well. So I'd say it's an average.
Okay, David Kuhn.
But that is his brand.
Yes.
And I think he knows his brand, and I think his strategy in this debate might have been a little different than, say, Blaine Higgs, who is trying to get in a knockout punch to become premier. David Kuhn is perhaps looking to just, first off, lock down Fredericton South so that he's reelected, but expand the Green Party message in the hopes of, say, picking up a riding or two. A place like Kent North, where Kevin Arsenault is polls perhaps show him in second place. He's running fairly strong there, and where the Greens can perhaps hold the balance of power. So I think maybe he knows that his message there might not be to offer the inspirational platitudes, but build on his brand. So I thought he did that well tonight. That was my take.
Madeline, your take on David Kuhn, please.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for David Kuhn. I think he did a really good job. And I think he did a good job of reminding people also, like, he has experience with the Legislative Assembly, and he's also a very good storyteller. So he would have these, where Brian Gallant would have numbers and deliverables and stuff like this, David Kuhn would have real life experience with people, and he could kind of show how he was a relatable person, and you could identify with him a little bit.
Hey, Julia, anything more from the audience watching?
Well, the comments continue to roll in, and Beth MC says on Facebook, I was happy the flood was mentioned, but they didn't address the remaining flood damage. So what does our panel think about that? Karina?
Yeah. I mean, I think the flood issue is an incredibly specific issue. They always connect it to climate change, which is interesting because, yes, obviously our climate is going to get more unpredictable, and therefore we're going to have more unpredictable natural events like this. But I think the flood question itself is so specific, I can see how it wouldn't necessarily come up in a debate of this nature. And yes, I mean, we have to have better emergency response. We have to have better financial plans in place to help. And we also have to put, mitigation in place to protect for these kinds of events. But I understand why the issue wasn't brought up and raised and discussed on this particular forum.
Do you agree with that, Jamie?
Yeah, but I also think that there's a group of people. So many people were affected by that flood, especially property damage. And this crosses over about, I'm thinking about seven ridings downriver from, including Fredericton, but downriver from that there was an opportunity for each of the candidates to address the issue of, say, insurance claims and the provincial funding to help out people who had properties, not just property homes, but or not just holiday homes or second houses, but people who lost their houses through this. So I thought there was an opportunity in the discussion around climate change, particularly the pictures showing the floods in Fredericton, where I think Chris Austin talked about it in his it affects his writing, but didn't get into specifics. So I thought there may be a missed opportunity there, but they also wanted to talk about climate change and carbon tax. So,
Madeline?
I kind of have to agree with Karina. I understand why it wasn't stressed that much. I don't know if it's just because I'm a young person or not, but I don't know. I didn't find the flood that interesting.
That's fair. You're not a homeowner.
I'm just being honest. I'm sorry.
Honesty is good.
Doesn't affect
It sometimes happens in the studio.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just read something that Jay Jake Reed wrote on Twitter, the number one issue for New Brunswickers, healthcare. Real policy discussion on healthcare during MB Vote's 2018 debate? Crickets. That's a good point, because healthcare is a big issue in this province. Access to a doctor, rural hospitals, our wait times for people looking for doctors. That's really kind of surprising that it didn't come up.
It's the number two issue for voters. If I'm in say CBC's vote compass of the data that we've collected, it's the number two issue for every party. Everybody who has an idea of who they might vote for, healthcare is number two. Economies tends to be number one for most, but healthcare is number two. It's on the minds of a lot of people. Each of the parties have addressed healthcare in their campaign platforms, and yet we had sort of two questions that were healthcare related, but the discussion didn't come to fundamentals about the healthcare system, about things like wait times and things like access. There was a little bit on home care, but no one ever actually addressed that outright, and we have a serious debate about that.
No, there was some discussion about mental health services for young people and the suicide rate, but you thought it might have come up in rural New Brunswick. Julie, do you want to go back to more questions?
There's a specific question here for Jamie. It's from Samuel Richard Wakefield. He says, Professor Gillies, am I throwing my vote away if I vote Green? It feels different this time around, in the sense that there seems to be more and more supporters for David Coon's Green Party.
Wow. I like it when former students get in touch. Hi, Sam. I think that as a political science professor, I don't believe that there is a concept of throwing your vote away. If you truly believe in voting for a political party and you believe in them, vote for them. Where strategic voting, of course, might come into play is that in ridings where you have multiple parties running and you know that the contest is between two parties, that you throw your vote to the lesser of two evils. But I think to Sam, I would argue, no, you're not throwing your vote away by voting for any of these political parties. If you like their message and truly feel passionate about it, you're right. This time, potentially in New Brunswick, a province that has gone from Liberal to PC to Liberal to PC over and over again, and not had a third party really play much of a role, there's an opportunity here where all of these parties are trying to find voters, and if you feel passionate about it, vote for a third party.
Okay,
and just to add on to that, as you were speaking, Sean Rocket commented, if we had proper representation, people wouldn't feel like they're throwing their vote away by voting for a smaller party. First past the post fosters a two-party system, which makes change very hard, he says.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's what I mean by New Brunswick citizens are looking for different answers of how we govern the province, and maybe looking at redefining this party politics model into something different that would allow better representation, more collaboration, less of this divisive sort of...
But who has the responsibility to make that happen? Where do you think that initiative is going to come from?
Well, that's a really good question, and really the power of the governing body, to drive that change is really the beginning, the thin edge of the wedge. But the citizenry has to get up and say, we're tired of this. We want a governing body who's going to actually start to look at what are the changes that we need to make in order to make that difference, and get behind the candidates that are saying those kinds of things, that they want to change the way government is run, and see if we can get them into office and get them working with the senior civil service and the citizenry to do that.
Okay, can we just, I don't know how much more time we have, and I just don't think it's fair to leave two leaders out in terms of your assessment of how they did, and because they are prominent leaders. So let's go to Brian Gallant. How did Brian Gallant do?
Well, I think I said in my earlier comments, I felt like he was the winner because there was no real challenge to him. I think, he debated the way he always does. He's very well spoken. He's very knowledgeable. He's incredibly bright, and he understands his stuff. Plus, he's been governing for the last 4 years, so he has all the data at his fingertips. So I think that came across. He was calm. There was, nothing that really rattled him. And so, again, like a lot of them, he stayed on brand. And I thought his performance was good.
Thanks, Karina. Jimmy, you were nodding in agreement.
Yeah, he was winner by default. And
that's
by default
interesting.
Is that, I don't think anybody landed a knockout punch. We'll see how this sworn affidavit plays. Beyond it being a great hashtag, it is fantastic for social media. But I'm not sure anybody landed a knockout punch. He did what he had to do, which is that he didn't get rattled and he didn't take the bait on anything. He appeared confident and he appeared like the person who is the premier and is in the lead. So I think he matched expectations, and part of debates is expectation matching, and he did what he probably set out to do.
Okay, Madeline, what did you think of how Brian Gallant performed?
Yeah, I agree. I also think he did well this debate. I think he did a good job of, as soon as they were getting into territory where he didn't have any solid answers, you kind of see him just jump back to what he knew best and sticking with his numbers and his recent statistics. So I think him and David Coon were similar in the ways that they had recent material to work with. So they have real things that people still remember and not from 4 years ago.
Okay, and last but not least, Blaine Higgs. How did Blaine Higgs do?
That whole stunt.
That's telling.
The stunt at the end, I mean, I despise all that stuff in politics, is the whole, turn it into a gong show kind of thing. So fortunately, it was only at the end of the debate. There was a lot of sort of consistent messaging, yelling out the same thing over and over again, trying to re-emphasize the points of the campaign. But I agree with Jamie's comments earlier. I think in appealing to conservative voters, I think Chris did a better job of doing that.
Wow. Do you agree?
To a certain extent, yes. Higgs had a job to do here, which is to go on the offensive and attack the premier and go for the vote that's still undecided. We're not talking about conservative voters and liberal voters. We're talking about people who can't make up their minds or haven't yet made up their minds.
Do we know what that is? What percentage of voter that is at this point?
I'm not sure we know those percentages. I'm sure party polling that they're doing is probably indicating that, but I would suspect that if we're to believe polls where the Liberals have a lead, maybe a comfortable lead, you have to do something to sort of break out a little bit here. And I know he tried very hard to sort of go after, at certain stages, Brian Gallant, but I don't think he ever landed anything. And I think it didn't help him having Chris Austin almost talking about the same platform points, but in a different way, kind of this populist voice, but this common sense solutions, man of the people voice, something that Blaine Higgs I don't think he found in this debate.
Same argument delivered in a more effective way on the part of Chris Austin.
I'm not sure necessarily it was more effective. It was just the voters that I think Chris Austin the voters that Chris Austin appeals to particular voters. He understands his brand, and he actually performed well with that. Blaine Higgs needs the People's Alliance vote to a certain extent as well if he's going to form majority government. Right. And he's got to appeal to that whole group. And he tried to stay on message, especially on taxes. But I think that in the contrast between him and the Premier, Brian Gallant performs well in debate situations. He looks good. He's wonkishly attractive in debates. And
there's another quote that will survive the evening.
As somebody who saw Justin Trudeau recently sort of in person, I didn't meet him, but I was close by there, that attractiveness matters.
It's the charisma factor.
The charisma factor matters,
Right.
and Brian Gallant did have that above the other candidates.
Okay. Madeline, that's a hard act to follow.
Yeah.
On the charisma scale. What did you think of how Blaine Higgs performed?
From him, I just saw a lot of pre-rehearsed slogans. I think he was honestly just boring to listen to. He didn't really talk about anything too exciting from my perspective anyways, and I think you don't really believe that he has a passion for helping New Brunswick grow. It's like as a group of people, it's more of New Brunswick grow as a business. So, I don't know.
Okay.
And just in the last few minutes that we have here, several people, Brent McPherson, Matthew Ian Clark, lots of commenters on Facebook are talking about voter apathy, and we touched on this. But Matthew Ian Clark says the prevalence of voter apathy needs to be addressed. What can we do to increase voter engagement in general elections? Because it's important to get out and make your voice heard for whichever candidate you feel would best represent you. And I think, would you speak to that, Maddie?
I think it does start at a younger age. And this year, actually, there's going to be polling stations in the Student Union building on our campus. So I think that's an awesome initiative, especially as a first-time voter where maybe it's a little bit confusing. Where do I register? Like all those types of things. They're setting it right out in front of you. It's there all week, and you just go and you do your part. And it's just puts it in your face a little bit more and reminds you that you have that responsibility to go out there and do your part.
Thank you for that. And, we can't ignore something that's like probably the most seen comment tonight about the format of the debate. Sean Cook says, why are we talking about winners here? Isn't the true intent of this debate to allow constituents to make an informed decision? Talking over each other does not accomplish information sharing. Unfortunately, he says he's still undecided and he needs to do further research. So is it faulty to talk about who won the debate, Karina?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that comment. I don't like the idea of picking winners and losers because, again, then we get in the win-lose kind of government model that we have. And then we need to find win-win solutions. We need to find ways to talk together, to collaborate and create dialogue. And all of those messages are coming from the citizenry. They're tired of the fighting. They're tired of you're right, I'm wrong. And they're trying to find some common ground so we can focus on solving problems in a way that are sustainable and that's going to make a difference for our province. So I totally agree. I think even the debate format, like even calling it a debate, is there a way that we can create a different opportunity or platform to get the conversations going with the candidates in terms of what they really plan to do? So
that's a good point about winners, but tonight there are going to be party people sitting in a bar downtown going, boy, Brian won that or David won that. They're using that language. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think...
Maybe party people are, but is the average citizen talking that way?
People who have an ideology. I think people who are party supporters probably would, but maybe the people who don't, maybe not.
I would also add that there's kind of a contradiction here that we're dealing with debate formats. The public wants, I think, these one-on-one debates about substance, about policy issues. And at the same time, they want to expand this to have every party leader have a say. So once you get more than, say, 2 or 3 people on stage, it becomes a somewhat unwieldy format. I study debate performances as part of my research. You look at, say, U.S. presidential debates where there's 17 candidates. They have to have a second debate of the lesser tier candidates who don't poll at a certain level. So once you get 5 voices in a room, at a certain point when you allow for that free discussion, which is needed if we're going to have a debate where they're allowed to address each other, the talking over becomes almost impossible, or almost impossible to control. And so I think sometimes that we forget every 4 years when we have 5 or 6 candidates in the room. Federal debates can be like this as well if all the parties are represented in the debate format. It's just it's kind of the worst of both worlds. But if we're not inclusive, then we're sort of leaving out those voices of smaller parties who want to be bigger parties.
Let me just throw this out there, and it's a little bit provocative, so forgive me in advance. Kyle Valan writes, all the panelists on the Facebook stream are heavily biased toward the Liberals. This is not analysis, it's cheerleading. And I don't throw that out there to be mean-spirited, but it's a point that's being made publicly, so I think it's fair to ask you for your reaction to what that person just said.
Well, I mean, it's definitely fair. I mean, when you get a group of 3 individuals, you're not going to represent the entire province's point of view. And certainly, I have supported all parties in my history of voting. To me, it's about good government. And in this case, it just so happens that, I think New Brunswick can't afford a repeat in terms of repealing the government and putting a new one in place. So as long as the current governing party can stand on its own 2 feet and there is no competition, then to me, it's in the best interest of the province to continue on with a Liberal mandate. So
Okay.
I'm a political scientist. I comment on shows like your morning show.
Yep.
I am nonpartisan. I don't join political parties. I don't give money to political parties. Part of the reason is because I teach students and I try to include all points of view. In something like this where we're talking about debates, I call them as I see them and try to be as neutral and nonpartisan as possible. So I don't think that I represent any particular political standpoint. I have views on all of this, but in discussions around elections and debate formats, this is very much just me as a political scientist trying to interpret what these leaders are saying in a debate format.
Was it unfair of me to put that question on the table?
Not at all. No, not at all.
Okay, all right,
Totally
good. Madeline,
fair.
go ahead.
I guess I would be interested to see kind of how I would have reacted if I was in a room with, let's say, previous PC voters or previous NDP voters, because we were commenting the whole time, and I thought I came to my own consensus like by myself, but you know what I mean, like it's obvious you can completely remove yourself from all bias, so I guess when you're around people it might slightly affect the way I thought, but I don't know, it's interesting. I appreciate that he brought that up because we did kind of center all around the same ideas. But
okay.
No, just to shift gears a little bit, Cheyenne Matthews comments, not one candidate speaking on special needs or seniors living below the poverty level, and this is going to be an epidemic, she says. Sadly, people need to look after our people, and the taxpayers won't mind spending on programs like that.
Yeah, I think I heard Jennifer specifically speak to that, is that taxpayers are willing to invest in our most vulnerable as long as it's done efficiently and effectively. And so that really kind of is the conversation I kind of heard, is let's have some accountability and return on investment when we make those investments. But at least 3 of the parties seem to be focused on looking at New Brunswick as a collection of people, to Madeline's point, and not as a business. And so that's what I heard, from the NDP, the Greens, and the Liberals is focusing on that kind of a model.
Just a point, Green Party of New Brunswick, who won the CBC New Brunswick debate?
Asking the question?
That's on their Twitter feed,
okay,
yeah.
There you go, winners and losers, right?
And actually, Sean Rouse, to that point, comments, I think you're all winners.
Sean, what's your address?
Pandering. We'll send you flowers for that. Mel Barton says, I found this to be more of an argument than a debate. I was left with more questions than answers. As a new resident to New Brunswick, it was saddening. So what do we think of that?
A little bit of a yell-a-thon. I think that when we have a space where there's 5 people talking and wanting the same amount of airtime, and that they all agree to the rules, you try to police this as best you can, as Harry did at moments, to sort of encourage somebody to be allowed to speak. But we also don't like it when the public doesn't like it when moderators try to interject either their views or cut off a point being made. And so that 5 or 6 minutes is allowed for that. The problem here, and there was one point there where we had our headsets on in the studio here, and all 5 of them were talking at the same time. We had no idea what they were actually saying, and it is difficult sometimes for viewers who are watching these debates to sort of get anything substantive out of them, other than the nonverbal cues or the way people look. And that, I think, is just a challenge of having debates on television. Maybe they should be only on radio.
There are problems with that as well, as you know.
As much as Terry would like that.
Yeah. But because the optics, are so important, that is the one thing maybe we get out of this. How did they perform, as opposed to what they said?
Well, that's a good point. And I was thinking about this while you were talking and earlier, because the concerns about the format started coming in almost, I would say, within the first 20 minutes. And I thought, okay, well, how... And I asked somebody who was raising the point of how difficult it was to listen to, what would you do to make it better? What option would you prefer? And I started to think about it. And I thought, well, maybe if you had a way for a leader to ask another leader a question and no one else is involved, just those 2 people, and you ask them a question, let that exchange continue, and then two more. I mean, I'm making this up on the fly, but there's an appetite for discussion that enlightens and informs. And it's difficult when you have 5 enthusiastic people who want to talk, who realize what the stakes are. And I say this from someone who has moderated debates as Harry has. It's a difficult job. Boy, sometimes it's almost impossible.
I think it is. It comes down to the question of how can you narrow down into 90 minutes, like entire platforms of policy from 5 different governments every 4 years. You know, that's really the window of opportunity that New Brunswickers get to engage with potential leaders. Seriously, we need to look at how do we create citizen engagement throughout the governing term so that citizens are part of the conversation. They feel part of the decision making. It's not just every 4 years where they get, you know, one little vote to say, yes, I'm part of this or not. So we have to expand that.
The next leader has to get community leaders like you and others together, and how do we fix what's wrong?
That's right. Again, I say, listen to your local candidates who are speaking about these kinds of changes that they want to see in government, about creating more open citizen engagement in the governing process, not just in the voting process.
So you're talking about citizen engagement, about voter engagement. I mean, this is a question I think for you, Maddie. It comes from Jeff Langell. He says young people are leaving in high numbers, leaving the province. I assume he means most see no future in the province. How can these guys and girl fix New Brunswick without solving that problem?
How can they fix the problem of young people leaving the province? That's a good question. I think that it wouldn't really apply to my perspective on it because I'm here for school, and I'll be going to the next school I'll be going to is based on the merit of that school. But I think a lot of the reason people are leaving the province a lot of the time is for trades. So maybe yes, yeah, I don't. I'm not.
It's
really
a big question.
Yeah.
For sure. So like when
maybe it's for one of the political analysts.
But like when you talk to your friends who are leaving or who want to leave, like what are the reasons? What are the reasons for not wanting to stay in New Brunswick?
Most of my friends went to secondary education, so university. So a lot of them either saw programs that they didn't see in Fredericton or UNB or Mount A here. Other ones, I think they just wanted to go and have a different experience. I'm not sure if their experience wasn't as great in New Brunswick, but I know a lot of them actually say they love coming back every time they do and they miss it. And I think that's a general feeling among the people I'm associated with anyways. They would love the opportunity to come back, but they need to do some growing on their own first. So.
And they need to have some opportunities here to come back too. Artie Watson asks, how does the panel feel about independent candidates? How do we feel about them? I don't know, Jamie, do you want to tackle that one?
Independent candidates have it tough because they don't have a party apparatus around them to help them campaign. And unless you have a name in a particular riding or a particular area, it's very difficult to break through. So you need to use usually established political parties to do that. That said, we've had independent MPs and MLAs elected in most provinces. We've had candidates who are independent but well known in the region finish a strong second, even in recent New Brunswick elections. If you're passionate about these issues, but you don't fit in a political party and you want to be out there and be heard and remain as an independent, go for it. But recognize that there are forces there at play in each election with a lot of money and a lot of support, a lot of signage, and the people connected to a political party. How many people it takes for a political party to run a campaign is a lot, and it's a huge hill to climb.
Let me just do a quick test here. There is a story that is emerging in other media who are watching the debate tonight. What do you think that story is? Karina?
Okay, I have to unpack that question a little bit.
Of the debate that we watched tonight, Adam Harris of the Telegraph Journal, Brunswick News, is preparing a story that will be in the paper tomorrow.
Oh, he's got to be following the affidavit.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Any surprise there?
No. Of course.
Wow.
We always grab onto the
A
craziest
lot of people
thing.
want to see that
Well,
affidavit.
he's got a photo of it. He's got a photo of it on his Twitter feed. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Amazing.
I assumed it was a blank piece of paper, to be honest.
Now that's cynical.
Well, we'll definitely see in the coming days
Yeah.
what's in that affidavit. We are drawing the end of our time here. We've actually doubled the time that we had allotted for this panel, but I want to thank all of you, Karina LeBlanc, Jamie Gillies, and Maddie Gorman-Assal, of course, Terry Sege as well, my co-host.
Thank you.
And for weighing in on tonight's debate.
Yeah, and we'll be back tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. on Information Morning, so you'll hear some of the highlights of the panel.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.